On Hanukkah, we light the candles commemorating a victory that happened thousands of years ago. We say the words, "You fought their battle, you judged their judgments, you took their revenge, you put the mighty in the hands of the weak, the many in the hands of the few." And the concept of Hanukkah, and certainly lighting the menorah, is for us to remember those times. And oftentimes, when you think about that, I think we have the sense of, thousands of years ago. How does it relate to me? How do I feel it? How do I sense that God is active and present in my world? Maybe historically back then, but do I see it today? And what relevance does the message of Hanukkah have to us when we live in such a vastly different world? And I'd like to share with you something that I believe sheds tremendous light on this very issue. You see, within most of our lifetime, and if you're younger, certainly within the past 50 years, we have experienced one of the greatest miracles that has ever been brought to humanity. And a miracle that's so astonishing that if you step back with open eyes, you have to say it is inexplicable. June 1967, the small little nation of Israel was surrounded by major Arab populations, major Arab powers. There were 3 million Jews living in Israel at the time and 100 million Arabs. But besides the 5 large nations that attacked, it was the entire gathered might of the Arab nation that decided to finally put an end to this scourge, put an end to this Jewish problem. And their plan was simple, their plan was clear: drive the Jews into the sea. And it was a declaration of war, but it wasn't a declaration of war with any end other than Jewish blood, annihilation of the Jewish people. And you have to appreciate what the odds of victory for the Arabs was. 650 dunam Arab land to every 1 dunam, 1 small part Israeli land. You're talking about 5 powerful armies. We think about these Arabs as, some hashish smoking, turban wearing fellows. The Egyptian legionnaires were carefully trained. Syria's air force was carefully trained. Prior to 1967, it was a very dangerous situation for Israel to shoot down an Egyptian or Syrian plane. Not because of the Egyptians or the Syrians, but because almost every one of them potentially might be manned by a Soviet pilot. The USSR devoted incredible amounts of resources, money, time, and expertise in training the Egyptians, training the Syrian forces, and they were highly trained crack troops, outspending the little state of Israel by a ratio of 4-1 every year from 1948 to 1967. I was a little boy in grade school at the time. And I remember that when war was declared, when the 6-day war began, in my school they began gathering bed sheets. The administration asked each child to go home and bring bed sheets to help the war effort. You may wonder why bed sheets. Because the Israelis, as well as the American Jews supporting, understood that there were to be so many injuries that there's no way that the Israeli hospitals could have enough bed sheets, enough linen to care for all of the wounded. And according to any normal assessment, it was to be a massacre of incredible proportions. Interestingly enough, the war was not won in 6 days. Really, it was won in 6 hours. In the very first 6 hours of the war, the entire Egyptian Air Force was destroyed, wiped out. Without air support, there was no way they could wage battle as they wanted to. But it's interesting to note, because Time magazine ran an article after the war describing the destruction of the Egyptian Air Force. Egypt and Israel are not far apart. And Egypt was well aware of the fact that Israel might just bomb their Air Force. Every Egyptian hangar which contained an Egyptian plane had a decoy hangar constructed next to it. So even if the Israelis were to bomb the hangars, they had a 1 in 2 chance of getting the hangar that actually contained the plane, whereas maybe getting the decoy. But by creating a decoy for every actual hangar housing a plane, the Egyptians knew that there was at best a 50% chance of hitting. After the war, they analyzed almost every bomb dropped on the Egyptian hangars fell on the hangars that contained the planes, and almost every decoy hangar was left untouched. And if you study the events of the war, in 6 days, not only did we win, we vanquished foes that were so mighty, so outnumbering us, so outpowering us, that it's beyond astonishing. And just as an illustration, West Point, which is the American highest academic military academy, gave its senior class a thesis project. Now, these were the seniors, these were already soldiers who had spent 4 years in school, and they were given a thesis project. And right after the 6-day war, the professor gave the graduating class the project of planning the taking of the Golan Heights. He gave them access to all the greatest military minds, gave them access to the latest computers at the time, and as a class they were given the project, plan the taking, and plan how the best strategy to take the Golan Heights would be. After a few days, the cadets came back to the professor and said, "Sir, we can't do it." The professor said, "What do you mean?" "Based on the sheer heights of the cliff, based on the powerful Syrian armaments, and based on the weakness of the Israeli troops, there is no strategy for the taking of the Golan Heights. It cannot be done." The professor analyzed the data, agreed with the students, and gave them a different project. Yet somehow the Golan Heights were taken. A huge tract of the Sinai desert was captured, and Israel, that tiny little fledgling country, won out against armies, navies, air forces, so many times more powerful, and it did it with such astonishing speed and ease that it clearly is in the category of quite eye-opening. But just to put it into perspective, I heard about a book, and I said, I must get this book. The name of the book is called The Seventh Day Soldiers Speak, and it's the chronicles of soldiers who lived through the 6-day wars. But after the 6th day, the 7th day, this was telling their stories, and all of the stories are written by non-religious soldiers, most of them, many of them kibbutzniks, not with any Jewish ideology. But there was one story in particular that caught my attention, and I decided that I must get this book. Here's the story. One Jeep, the driver of the Jeep, along with 4 of his other companions, are heading into the Sinai desert at the very beginning of the campaign. And he describes that as soon as they start going into the Sinai, there's a tremendous amount of sand that's being kicked up, and they lost eye contact with any of their comrades. And it wasn't until they were deep, deep into the Sinai that they realized that they were alone. 50 miles into the Sinai desert, one lone Israeli Jeep. And they understood the difficulty they were in when they saw the Egyptian MiGs flying. Now you have to appreciate, the sand of the desert is flat. Here was a Jeep of Israeli soldiers waiting to be destroyed, demolished. He describes, he stopped the Jeep. He told his men, spread out. They spread out in the sand, and they knew that their end was there. And he describes that the Egyptian planes flew as low as they possibly could. And they strafed the sand. He described you could feel the sand explode. And after the first pass, when all of the planes had left, he stood up untouched. And he looked left, and he looked right, and none of his soldiers were touched either. But the Egyptians realized that they missed. So he describes that he saw them in air, turn around, and come for a second pass. Same routine, spread out. They lie down, face down in the sand, and again they feel the sand being ripped up with bullets. After the pass, he stands up, is untouched. He looks left, he looks right, and every one of the soldiers was untouched. And then he saw the Egyptians coming for a third pass because they understood that they missed and they weren't looking to miss again. Same routine, spread down in the sand. Again, the planes fly low, strafe the sand. And again, every Israeli soldier there stands up untouched. But then they understood that they were really in for trouble because the Egyptian planes circled, came back, and they were coming on a fourth pass. Now, if you're familiar with the Vietnam War, you know that napalm is a petroleum byproduct. It's a horrific, destructive force. It's effectively a bomb that ignites into fire on contact. And he describes that on the fourth pass, the Egyptian planes dropped the napalm, and he could feel the heat, the searing heat, explode. And when they passed, he stood up, and every soldier with him stood up untouched. Eventually the Israelis came, chased them out of the sky. He survived the war, and he told his story. Now, when I originally heard about the story, I said to myself, I must read this. I must see it with my own eyes. And I went on Amazon, and I went on finding a very rare out-of-print book, but I found it, and I held it in my hands, and I read it with rapt astonishment, and exactly as I described is what he was describing. And then he comes to the punchline. Then he comes to what we learn from it. And he says these words, I guess we got lucky. And I wanted to drop the book. What? I guess we got lucky. And astonishingly, that was his conclusion. After living through a miracle that's inexplicable, after watching in front of his eyes that which can't possibly be, his lesson that he learned was, I guess we got lucky. And if you'd like to understand Jewish history, you have to do one thing. You have to step back and be objective. And you have to ask yourself, what do my eyes see? You see, if you wish not to see miracles, you can blind yourself. If you'd like to remain in a state of stupor, you can see the most miraculous things happening and just say, hey, whatever. It just happenstance. It's just occurrences. But if you want to see God in the world, open your eyes and ask yourself one simple question. What are the odds? What does my mind tell me? When I study a nation still existing after thousands of years, when I see the miracles involved, what do I see? And from an objective, clear standpoint, there's one answer. I see God. God protecting his people. God ushering his people in. And if you'd like to see the message of Hanukkah, it's God, you fought our battles then as now. You judged our judgments then as now. You took our revenge then as now. And God is the Jewish people's defender. We are one nation, an
What I would like to talk about tonight is ideals and standards, how they're different, and how one uses them in guiding one's personal growth. On the surface, it's very easy to describe the difference. A standard is something that's binding on me now, something I have to do. If I violate a standard, I mean a standard of my own, then I've failed. I'm guilty. An ideal is something that you want to grow towards, want to become more like. Indeed, some say that if you've achieved your ideals, get new ideals. Ideal is not supposed to be something you have in your pocket. Ideal is something that's supposed to be beyond you, and something that inspires you to grow in that direction. The trouble is there's a problem which muddies the waters, which makes it not obvious that what I've said is right or even coherent. It's a well-known philosophical problem, and I'd like to describe it to you and describe what I think the solution is. Not only I, but there's one school of thought like this. I think it's the Jewish school of thought. I'll show you why it's a Jewish school of thought. And then, when we've got that out of the way, hopefully we're on the same page. Then I'll come back and talk about ideals and standards in the light of the solution to that problem, and also how we apply them in practical terms. There are 613 commandments. What is it that I am obligated to do? Am I obligated to fulfill all of them? Okay, all of the ones that apply to me. Am I obligated to fulfill them all? There are two standard objections to that idea, even though I would have thought so. God commanded them. And there are two variations on the same idea. One is, suppose it's impossible for me to fulfill all of them. I just can't. I haven't got the time, the strength, the knowledge, the resources. I just can't do it. And the other half of the thought is, really, all I can do is try my best. That's all I can do. So really what we ought to say is, I'm obligated to try my best. To go beyond that and say, you're not only obligated to try your best, you have to also succeed, seems to be unreasonable. And indeed, a very famous philosopher named Immanuel Kant had this as a fundamental principle of his philosophy. To say that you ought to do something assumes that you're able to do it. If you aren't able to do it, there's no point in telling you that you have to do it, you ought to do it. You must do it because it's idle, because you can't do it. The slogan in philosophy is, ought implies can. You can only say somebody ought to do something when you have in your pocket that he can do it. If it's not true that he can do it, then it's not true that he ought to do it. Ought implies can. That was an axiom of Kant's moral philosophy. And most people hearing it first time, I think, find it to be quite obvious. Nevertheless, there is another view. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe you ought to do it even if you can't. Why does that sound crazy? I'll tell you why it sounds crazy. Because you say to the person, you ought to X. And he says, but I can't. I can't do it. It's impossible. It's beyond me. We don't want to blame him. We don't want to penalize him. We don't want to hold him responsible for not doing X. According to this second point of view, that's really what bothers us. It seems to be grossly unjust to say, you ought to do X, you didn't do X, I'm going to punish you, even though you couldn't have done it. The fact that he couldn't have done it means that he shouldn't be blamed and he shouldn't be punished. But maybe that's all it means. Maybe that all it means is that when you don't fulfill your obligations because you couldn't, you shouldn't be blamed and punished. Must we go on further and say, and furthermore, you didn't have an obligation in the first place? That's not obvious. So here's the second position. You are obligated to do all the things that are right, good, and morally binding. If you fail because you can't, then there's no penalty. But that doesn't mean that you're free from the obligation. You think of the 613 commandments, we are obligated to do all of them. We ought to do all of them perfectly. It's just that when I can't do one or another or some in combination, then I'm not subject to penalty. The Gemara puts it this way: onus rachmana patre, a person who's in a position beyond his control, God frees him from, patre is to be freed from, and then the commentators fill in, frees him from onish, from punishment. That doesn't mean he's not obligated. According to this picture, he is obligated. Just pays no penalty for failure.
Does that mean what you can't do, you shouldn't do?
No. What we're saying here is that if I can't do it, maybe I still should do it. Even if I can't do it, I should do it.
What, challenge yourself?
Sorry?
Challenge yourself or something like that?
No. You're speaking for the first point of view. If I tell you you should do it, and it's impossible for you, that's just dumb. It's just pointless. It's just hopeless. I mean, how can I tell you should do something that you can't do? That was the first point of view.
Who you just told that I should do something? Do you know what I mean?
Sorry?
Like that kind of thing where...
No. I'm talking about your own values. I'm not talking about imposing values on somebody else. You recognize for yourself that these are things that are important. Now, should you say to yourself, well, I think that X is important, but since I'm not able to do X, I don't really have any obligation to do X?
If you don't find it important, you should still do it, isn't it?
No. I'm not saying anything about that. Someone's dying. Is it important to save his life?
Yeah.
For sure. Suppose he's too far away from me. He's just too far away. I can't get there in time. Does that mean now it's not important to save his life? Sure, it's important to save his life. I just can't do anything about it. Do I have an obligation to save his life? So there are two ways to say it. No, of course not. You can't get there, so you can't be obligated to do it. That's one way to say it. The other way to say it is, of course you have an obligation to save him.
But you can't do it.
You can't do it, so you're not penalized for not living up to your obligation. You're not penalized.
As long as the intention is there, yeah.
But, it's funny to talk about an intention. This is something I know I can't do. That sounds idle. It sounds a little psychologically mixed up. But I'm recognized as an obligation to do it.
Yeah.
It's just that it's beyond my ability to do it. Now, if you consider these two possibilities, in the Talmud, if you had to face a question like that, the immediate question would be, L'may nafka mina. What practical difference does it make if we say it one way or the other? If you can't think of a practical difference that it would make, then there's a suspicion that it's just talk. They're not real concepts behind it, because it can't make any difference what you do. So the question will be, what difference does it make if I say it one way or the other? I think there is a difference. I think the difference applies specifically to Jewish law. But let me give you a simple example, and then perhaps I'll give you some examples from Jewish law as well. Richard borrowed money from Paul. Now, when he borrowed the money, he had assets, and he had a good job, and he was healthy, and there was absolutely no reason to suspect he would have trouble paying it back. He borrowed the money in good faith, and he signed a document. He'll pay it all back by June 1st. That was in July. That was in September. But then things started to go wrong. His house burned down, and he contracted emphysema, and one of his parents died, and his other parent is dependent upon him. And he ends up with no resources and no ability to make money. Comes June 1st, and he just can't do it. He can't do it. It's impossible for him to do it. Let's try out these 2 points of view on this case. The first point of view says, well, if he can't do it, he has no obligation to do it. You can't say that he ought to do it, because he can't do it. There's no point in saying you ought to do things that you can't do. So, at least as long as he has no resources to pay the money back, he has no obligation to pay the money back.
He does, because someone gave him the money.
Huh?
Someone gave him the money, so of course he has to pay back.
Who gave him the money? In my scenario, nobody gave him the money.
He said he borrowed money.
He spent it. Oh, sorry. Usually when you borrow money, you don't borrow money to put it in the bank and then wait till the time's up and pay it back. You borrow money to spend it. Right? But he assumes he has a good job, he's making money, has a house, if necessary, he'll sell the house. He has ways to pay it back if necessary. And now he's lost all those resources. Of course, he spent the money that he borrowed. So now that's one possibility. If he can't pay it back, he doesn't owe it. It's not obligated. If and when he'll get money, he'll have to pay it. But in the meantime, right now, he has no obligation to pay it back. That's one point of view. The other point of view is he has an obligation to pay it back. He ought to pay it back. It's just that when June 1st goes by and he doesn't show up with the money, we don't blame him. We won't penalize him. We won't criticize him because it's become impossible for him to pay. Now, what would be the practical difference between those two? Well, the practical difference might be for me. I'm looking at Richard, poor Richard. Yeah, I'm quoting Dickens. Poor Richard. And Richard can't pay. I have spare cash. Should I lend Richard money to pay off the debt? Is there any moral sense to my lending Richard money to pay off the debt or not? I think the answer to that question will depend upon which view you have. If you say that right now Richard has no obligation to pay, it is not true that he ought to pay, why then should I lend him the money? What would I be accomplishing? What kind of morality would I be serving lending him the money? True, if I lend him the money, then I will make him obligated. But is there any moral rule to make people obligated to do things? Does morality ask me, praise me for making people obligated to do things which, without me, they're not obligated to do? That's not obvious. Right now, he's free and clear. There's no moral gain in my lending the money to pay it back, since right now he has no obligation to pay. But if you take the second point of view, then he has an obligation to pay. He ought to pay. When he doesn't pay, he's failing in an obligation. There's a moral loss here. The world is morally bad or morally worse because he's not fulfilling his obligation. It's just that we can't blame him. Can't blame him. Can't penalize him because he's incapable of doing anything about it. Then I could say to myself, look, there's a human being who's not living up to his obligations. And I can arrange that he should live up to his obligations. I can lend him the money, open-ended. I have the spare cash. And then he can fulfill his obligation to pay the debt. Then I think there's a moral incentive for me to do that. Because I make the world a better place. As it is now, a person is failing to live up to his obligation, and I can take away that moral loss by lending him the money. Then I ought to do that. I think that's one difference between the first view and the second view. Are we clear so far? Okay, now, in Jewish law, when someone has an obligation, he's not able to fulfill it, it is a positive mitzvah for anyone else who can help him do it, to help him do it. We don't say, well, since he can't do it, he's not obligated. No, what we say is, even if he can't do it, he is obligated, he ought to do it, he's just not penalized for failure. So, there was a time, 100 years ago, and 50 years ago in Europe, around Sukkot time, especially in Northern Europe and Poland, where getting a lulav and esrog was very, very difficult. They don't grow in those areas, and if they were growing in those areas, they'd be dead by then because the ground is covered with snow, all withered. They shipped them in from someplace else, they're quite expensive. I have a lulav and esrog. Other people don't. Since they don't have and they can't get, according to the first view, they have no obligation to do that mitzvah.
Yeah, but I'm obligated to help them do the mitzvah.
Only if they have an obligation to do it.
And then they're Jews also.
But if they're not obligated to do it, why should I be obligated to help them? A person has to give 10% on his income to charity. Okay? He's going through the month, and he's earned his money, and he's given 10%. He's finished. He's finished his charity obligation for the month. Should I give him $10,000 so he'll give another $1,000 to charity? Why would I do that? Why would I do that? What for? What would he gain? How would the world be a better place? He's fulfilled his obligation to charity. Nothing else he has to do. If I give him $10,000, then he's got to give another $1,000 to charity. That's true, but what point is there in doing that? Morality doesn't gain anything from that. The world doesn't become a better place when I give him $10,000, he gives another $1,000 to charity. Here too, if a person doesn't have a lulav and esrog, if you think he has no obligation, why should I lend him mine? What for? Because when I lend him mine, I create an obligation for him? Who says that morality cares about creating obligations for people? Why should I do that? But if he has an obligation to take lulav and esrog, he does have an obligation. Just since he doesn't have one, he won't be penalized for failure. If I lend him mine, I'm helping him fulfill his obligation. That's making the world morally a better place because he's now fulfilled an obligation that otherwise he would have failed to fulfill. So the Jewish point of view is that you're obligated to do all of the 613 commandments perfectly. That's what you're obligated to do. It's just that when that obligation runs up against your finite resources, finite abilities, finite strength, and you fail to live up to some parts of that obligation, if you can honestly say, I didn't fulfill those, and I failed to fulfill those because they're beyond my capacity, then you have no penalty. But the obligation is there. Are we together so far? Okay. Now, given that, I want to distinguish between standards and ideals in those terms. A standard is something which I have an obligation to fulfill. Something that's binding on me now. True, there might be cases where I don't live up to standards, and maybe cases where I'm not able to live up to standards, but I'm obligated to do that. If I don't, I failed. I might have failed because I wasn't able to do better. And therefore, I don't get blamed or penalized for the failure, but a failure it is. And that would mean that other people have a moral incentive to help me live up to the standards, because the world is the worst place when I'm violating standards. That's how I want to describe a standard. A standard is something that I have an obligation to live up to now. And that's precisely what an ideal is not. An ideal is not something that I have an obligation to live up to. Not because it's impossible. That's not the issue. Some standards I have an obligation to live up to, and I'm not. It's not possible for me. It's not because it's impossible. But the purpose of an ideal is to inspire a person to grow in that direction, to try to become more and more in tune with the ideal. The purpose of that ideal is not to regulate my behavior 100% now. It's something that I should strive to improve in approaching. I think a healthy person in any area of life, and certainly in our area of life, needs both. A person needs standards and a person needs ideals. A person needs standards because, in fact, there are binding obligations. There are binding minimums that if a person doesn't recognize that, then he's just morally unrealistic. And they're pretty well agreed upon, what those binding minimums are, given my position that you're obligated even if you can't live up to it. You shouldn't steal. You shouldn't steal, you shouldn't damage other people's property, you should save people in danger, insofar as you can without endangering yourself, help people in various ways. You should try to behave in a just, fair manner, promote justice and fairness in society. These are things that are obligations because they're standards. A person who fails to do that feels bad and knows there's an urgency about doing better because he's violating an obligation. When it comes to ideals, that's what guides one's surplus energy, one's surplus creativity for growth above and beyond the standards, the minimum standards that one has for life. I think compassion, sympathy, where I identify with a person and I feel what he's feeling. The Torah talks about charity and has two verses. One verse is, don't tighten your fist, and the other verse is, don't harden your heart. So the commentators ask, if you've already been told not to tighten your fist, that means give money. Why does it also say don't harden your heart? And they say it's not enough to give money. That's not enough. You have to feel the pain of the person who's asking for money. You have to know it's hard for him. It's embarrassing for him. You have to sympathize, and you have to treat him in a way that's sensitive to his pain. What some people do even today, it was more common, I think, in Yerushalayim of 100 years ago, but even today, when a person asks for charity and they give him charity, they say, thank you for providing me with the opportunity to do the mitzvah of charity. Meaning, not only am I giving you something, but you're giving me something. Indeed, what you're giving me is more precious than what I'm giving you. I'm giving you money, and you've given me the opportunity to do a mitzvah. Mitzvah is worth more than the money. So in this little transaction where I give you money, I'm getting more than you're getting. Yeah.
So doesn't it come off a bit rude saying that?
Sorry, say again?
Doesn't it come off a bit rude, like the saying, thank you so much that you're making me be able to do this mitzvah.
Yes.
So in some way, like, you're justifying that they're poor, so you're just like reiterating it to them and like making a statement. I know what you're doing with a good mitzvah, but in some way you're making them feel bad about themselves.
I don't think that's right, and I think maybe you're conflating two ideas that really should be separated. To imply that his being poor is okay, maybe with the background that if he's poor, it must be God who made him poor. If God made him poor, then it must be okay that he's poor because God does that, and God does it's right. But then the conclusion from that is I shouldn't give him charity. Because if it's really right that he should be poor, who am I to disturb what God set up? If God wants him rich, let God make him rich. That's what a Roman challenged Rabbi Akiva with. If your God loves the poor so much, let him take care of them. Why do I have to take care of them? The answer is, when I give him charity, what I'm saying is, you shouldn't be poor. It's not right that you're poor. If it were right that you're poor, I wouldn't give you charity. I would leave you where it's right. No, I'm giving you charity to get you out of poverty, insofar as I can, insofar as I have my responsibilities of distributing my charity money are concerned. And then I say to him, but I don't want you to think that in this transaction, you're taking and I'm giving, so I'm better than you, I'm superior to you. I want you to know that you're giving me something precious also, because you're making it possible for me to do the mitzvah of charity. A poor person who hears that feels, so I'm not just a drain. I'm not just a sink for other people's kindness. I'm also doing something for somebody else. I think that's very important to build the poor person. There were poor people, the commentators tell us, who didn't take money all year long. They had their way of doing things without taking money. Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, they did take money in order to give the mitzvah of charity to others who were worried about their judgment before God. They wanted them to have an extra minute. They were mitzvah. They were willing to take money. So they really are doing it for the sake of the other person's mitzvah. I say to a poor person, I thank you for the fact that you gave me the opportunity to do this mitzvah. When you say thank you to somebody, you make them feel good. You don't make them feel bad. When you say thank you to somebody, you're building him up. You're not pushing him down. This is a classical Jewish idea that you recognize that he's also got something to give. He's also got something valuable. He's also providing an opportunity. This is the idea that when you fail to live up to an obligation, that's a failure, and it's something which you need to have as a bottom line. And ideals are something that you grow towards, something to inspire further growth. Now, are we together so far?
There's two things that it says in the Torah. Those are both standards?
No. The standard is something that I have an obligation to live up to now. If I fail to live up to that, I'm failing.
How do we give charity?
So now, let's see. If he asks me for charity,
Close your fist. That would be a standard, right?
yes, I have to. There's a certain amount of money that I'm obligated to give. I must give it. If I don't give it, then I'm definitely failing.
The other one would be...
But let's say compassion. So compassion is where I have to feel what he feels, and that's without end, really. There are people who perform the compassion in very dramatic ways. A person would come in and they would cry with him. Because I said, please tell me what you're collecting for. Tell me how long you've been collecting. Tell me how hard it is. And they would cry with him. And then, and feed him. You must be hungry. You must be thirsty. There's no limit to what you can do other than just hand out money. Now, the question then becomes this. Given that the standards I'm obligated to right now, and the ideas are just a matter, that's giving it away, sort of, they're a matter of further growth. If I'm not living up to my standards right now, should I put all of my effort into living up to my standards, fulfilling my obligations, before I start working on also growing towards my ideals? In terms of the importance of each one, defined the way I've defined them, that seems to be almost inescapable. If you have a person who's a kleptomaniac, he's stealing. Okay, he's out of control. I mean, I don't know too much about the psychology. So if I'm not getting psychology right, then pretend. I'm just talking about this as an example. What I learned 100 years ago is that a kleptomaniac is someone who's out of control. He has to steal. He can't help it. So he's stealing other people's stuff. That's terrible. It's a crime. Something he's obligated not to do. Now, one might say, well, work on that. Get help. Get some kind of counseling. One way you think you can stop kleptomania cold is simply hire somebody to walk around with the guy who watches hands. He's not going to steal when somebody's watching him. He's going to ring the bell right away so he won't get away with it. Part of the thrill of kleptomania is I can get away with it. I can fool them, outsmart them, and get away with it. If he knows he can't get away with it, it doesn't happen. So the first thing we'll say is you're stealing other people's property. You've got to stop that. What? Grow in terms of your ideals of compassion or whatever else it is? Not at the expense of taking other people's property. So the first thought is standards are really binding. They're binding immediately. Ideals would be only for someone who's already living up to all his standards. Golly, I think that would mean that ideals are going to be quite rare. Quite rare. Everyone, a person who's living up to all of his standards, never fails to live up to his standards. I think that's not common. I think there's a countervailing thought, a thought on the other side, which has to be taken into account. How to work them out in detail, I'm not sure, but I think there's a countervailing thought on the other side. There's something impoverished about a person who only works on living up to his obligations. There's something impoverished in that. The idea of going beyond yourself, the idea of going beyond what you're absolutely obligated to do, is a necessary part of a morally and spiritually healthy person. The ability to make a gesture above and beyond. I owe money to benefactors, and I have to pay it back. Can I buy a gift for my wife? Or should we say, you borrowed money. Pay back the money you owe. What do you mean buying a gift for your wife? The other thought is, no, part of life is stepping beyond yourself. Part of life is going beyond what you are recognize you're obligated to do, that you must do, that you ought to do. And if that part of you isn't given expression, then there's something spiritually impoverished about your performance. This question is mirrored within Jewish law. We have two Jewish laws which mirror this distinction that I've been making all the way through, which are categories that are recognized and discussed in those terms precisely. There are mitzvahs which are called mitzvah v'osa. You are obligated to perform the mitzvah. God said, do X. Do X. I'm ordering you to do X. If you do X, you'll be rewarded. If you don't do X, you'll be punished. It's an obligatory mitzvah. Then there are voluntary mitzvahs. Voluntary mitzvahs, where God says, I invite you to do X. I'm not ordering you. I'm not obligating you. I'm inviting you. If you do X, you'll be rewarded, but if you don't do X, you won't be punished. I'm allowing you to omit it if you like. I'm just inviting you to do it, and if you do it, you'll be rewarded. There are mitzvahs of both kinds. I'll give you an example. There's a mitzvah during Sukkot to live in the sukkah. Dwell in the sukkah. Make the sukkah your home. All sleep must be in the sukkah. All sleep. Not even a 10-second cat nap are you allowed to take outside the sukkah. Eating, major meals have to be eaten in the sukkah. Major meals means bread or large quantities of cake and other baked goods. Some say wine, but meat and vegetables and cheese and milk, fruits, all that can be eaten outside the sukkah. You're not obligated to eat that in the sukkah. However, if you go into the sukkah to eat them, you make a blessing on the mitzvah of sukkah. So when you go in to eat meat and vegetables and fruit or cheese, you're doing the mitzvah of sukkah. You're just not obligated to do it. It's a voluntary mitzvah. Now the mitzvah of sukkah is set up in two tiers, the obligatory and the voluntary. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates a voluntary mitzvah, that means he sees a value in that mitzvah being voluntary. It's not just a throwaway. That there are these two levels of mitzvah. We're coming to Hanukkah. The Neiros Hanukkah have three levels. They're the only mitzvah in the Torah. This is rabbinic, but it's the only mitzvah that we have in the entire Jewish tradition. It has three levels. There's the Ber mitzvah, which is one candle per house per night. For the whole household, 8 candles for the entirety of Sukkot. Then there are two ways to extend it. One is that each person should light his own. And the other is that each night you should add an extra candle. Ashkenazim and Sephardim disagree on which is the order of extension. So one is the minimum mitzvah, the next one is called Mahadrin, and the next one is called Mahadrin min Mahadrin. Mahadrin means to do things in a superior fashion. So there's the minimum, superior, and superiorest, the greatest superior. And the mitzvah is set up in that way. Why is the mitzvah set up in that way? Because you know the story. They found one container of pure oil. They put it in the menorah, and it burned for 8 nights. After 8 nights, they had new supplies of pure oil. Let me ask you a question, just an informational question. Suppose they had found no pure oil. What would they have done? They would have lit impure oil. Impure oil is permissible when you have no pure oil. Tu mahutra b'tzibur. All impure objects, quantities, even if the person is impure, there's no way of doing it in purity, then you do it with impurity. So when God made the miracle of finding, that's right, well, he made a double miracle, finding the one container of oil, making it burn for 8 days, he didn't do that to make lighting the menorah possible. He did that to make lighting the menorah ideal. Not possible, but ideal. So the rabbis, when they set up the mitzvah, said we have to reflect that. We have to reflect the idea that there's the minimum and the ideal. But many mitzvahs have 2 levels. Many mitzvahs have a minimum level and a better level. So in order to make the mitzvah of Hanukkah picture this concept of ideal in a way that's related to Hanukkah, they made 3 levels. No other mitzvah has 3 levels. There's only 2 levels. But here the Torah is telling us, and today, I don't know how difficult it was 2,000 years ago to procure oil or wax, and whether poor people really couldn't do any better. Today, there's no one who can't have everyone light and add the number of candles. Everyone does it that way. And the message is we're striving for that higher ideal. The higher ideal of something which is the best, even though it goes beyond what I'm obligated to do. The Nesiva Shalom, previous Slonim Rebbe, Zechatzaddik Lebracha, put this idea into a spiritual and psychological context. Let's imagine a person who lives up to his standards, recognizes standards and lives up to them, faithfully. And sometimes it's hard, and he works on it, and he produces and succeeds. How should we picture his mental state? How should we picture his moral fiber or his moral character? I think we could say that he's responsible. He's dutiful. He recognizes obligations and fulfills them. That could be the total mental state of a person who fulfills the standards. What's the mental state of a person who also lives in terms of ideals, who goes beyond the minimum standards? That can't just be responsibility and duty, because he's not responsible to do those things. He has no duty to do those things. That's an expression of love, where I go beyond what I'm required to do. I can only show that I love you if I do something for you that I'm not obligated to do. If you work for me and we have a contract, and behind the contract I owe you $2,000, when I hand you the $2,000, that's not an act of love. You don't see any love in that. I have to give it to you. I'm obligated to give it to you. By law, I have to give it. If I don't give it, you can sue me. That's not love. Love is only when I give you something that I don't owe you. I'm not obligated to give you. So God sets up obligations, absolute duties, and then he sets up opportunities to go beyond the absolute obligations and duties, where you can express love for God. Love for God is one of the mitzvahs also. So God gives us an opportunity to express it. That means that going beyond the minimum standards is a important part of serving God. Serving God is not enough just to live up to the minimum standards. Now, we do have a rule that if it's a conflict between two mitzvos, one is obligatory, you have to do it, it's a duty, an obligation, and the other is voluntary, and there's a conflict between the two of them, I think in every case we are required to do the obligatory one and not the voluntary one. So, in terms of priority, in a conflict situation, the obligatory ones take precedence, and that goes along with the first intuition we said. Look, this I have to do. I'm obligated to do this. What do you mean I'm going to violate an obligation so as to strive for an ideal? Mapitom. Who gives you permission to do that? But there are times when no obligatory mitzvah is binding on you, and where you have room and time for voluntary mitzvahs. And then adding voluntary mitzvahs to your repertoire is an important aspect of expressing love of God. There's a phrase which comes up in the Tanakh many times, chesed ve'emes. Chesed means loving kindness, and emes means that which is absolutely real. I know emes is translated as truth, but it's not really correct. That's a long story, it's a whole shir, I'm not going to do it now, I'm just telling you the truth. That emes doesn't mean true, it means that which is absolutely real. Absolutely real. The Gaon of Vilna asks, why do these two words come together so often? Throughout the Tanakh, you have them over and over again together. And he says, because a person who dedicates himself to one is very likely to give himself leave not to live up to the other perfectly. A person who's working on his obligations, and he succeeds in fulfilling all his obligations, he says, I'm doing everything that's required, everything, perfectly. Want me to go beyond also? Do extra also? Mapito. These are the things that are really important, things that are binding, and I'm succeeding in doing them. Don't ask anything else from me. The other, which is even worse, is the person who says, look how much extra I'm doing over here. I'm doing so much extra here. Surely I should have some leeway in not living up to that obligation, in not fulfilling that obligation, because look at all the extra that I'm doing over here. The Gaon says, of course, neither of those is appropriate. Neither is appropriate as a stopping place and saying what I'm doing is okay. Pure emes is not appropriate because you have to go beyond yourself also. And chesed, to the extreme in one area, does not justify violating a standard in another area. One needs to work that both of them should be in place, and even if one has not yet fulfilled all of the obligatory, there is room for some expression of the voluntary, so that the quality of love of God will be in place. Okay? Want to get that so far? Now, the choice of ideals, there's actually a verse in the Torah which talks about this. It's Kedoshim Tihiyu. Ramban puts that verse, Kedoshim Tihiyu means be holy. And there's another verse in Deuteronomy, that's in Vayikra, in Leviticus. In Deuteronomy it says, V'yasisa yashav atov b'nei Hashem. Do that which is straight and good in God's eyes. On both of those verses, Nachmanides has a commentary, and he cross-references the two commentaries. Do what is straight and good in God's eyes. My, what might that be? There are a lot of mitzvahs out there. A lot of mitzvahs involving interpersonal obligations. Is this another one? Is this mitzvah 614? Probably not. So then what is it? It's just redundant? It means do what is straight and good. It's just another way of saying do all the other mitzvahs. Ramban says no. And he says something that's a bit surprising, maybe even shocking. He says, it is impossible to write down all of the rules for governing interpersonal behavior. It's impossible to write down a full list of all the rules governing how you should behave with other people. Friends, associates, family, society. It's impossible. Now, let's just pause and take note. This book is written by God. So Ramban is saying it's impossible for God to write down a complete list of rules governing interpersonal behavior. I think what he means is God could write it down, but it'd be 1 trillion pages long. What good would that do us? He couldn't write it for us. We wouldn't be able to guide our behavior on the basis of all the rules that are necessary. So, says the Ramban, God operates with a double policy. Some rules he gives us explicitly, literally, precisely, in detail. And then he says, don't be satisfied merely with the exact rules that I gave you. Strive to go beyond the rules that I gave you to do what is right and good in God's eyes. Straight and good in God's eyes. What might that be? So that's a whole story, how you know what that is and how the rabbis knew. But there's a responsibility to go beyond what the exact laws say. I'll give you an example of one. I'm selling a field. Let's put it out for bids, and I'll sell it to the highest bidder. I get 2 equal bids. I can flip a coin. But it turns out that one bidder has his home and his home field 5 miles away. And the other bidder has his home and his home field adjacent to mine. Then I must sell it to the second buyer. Because it's much more efficient for him, much more useful to him. The rabbis pushed this law so strictly, this is unbelievable. They said, if I sell it to the guy 5 miles away, when the guy 5 miles away pays the money, it becomes the land of the guy next door. He's forced into acting as an agent for the guy next door. Of course, the guy next door should pay him back his money. But he can't buy it. He can't buy it. Now, that's not written anywhere. Moses didn't command that. The rabbis said we have to do what's straight and right. Here, the added benefit to the guy next door can't be overlooked. It can't be overlooked. I get the same sale price, but the benefit to the buyer is much bigger in this case. I have no right to sacrifice that. There's endless refinements on how you can treat other people, and the Torah requires us to go beyond what the written law tells us. And in Kedoshim Tiyu, the Rambam makes the same remark about personal life. It says the laws of personal life do not exhaust how a person should live his life. For example, he says, we have laws of kashrus. Certain things you can eat, certain things you can't eat, ways you have to prepare them, combinations. What is to stop a person from getting 100% kalat kosher badatz meat and 100% kosher badatz wine and eating and drinking himself into a stupor? Where are the laws of kashrus to say not to do that? Says the Ramban, that's Kedoshim to you. Be holy. Infuse your life with holiness above and beyond the strict, exact laws that bind you as standards, as minimum obligations, requirements, duties. The Ramban says we have this responsibility in both personal life and in interpersonal life. Now, how do I do that? How do I know which way to go, which way to grow? Here it's individual. Each person is different. Each person is different. Some people have natural sensitivities, natural gifts, natural talents. Use them. Start there. Grow in the directions that are easy for you, that are natural for you. Then you can think about growing in other ways. Everyone should be involved in a process of personal growth, above and beyond the obligatory. Yes, individually, there's a conflict between obligatory and voluntary. Obligatory takes precedence. But it's a necessary part of a person's spiritual life to be also involved in the growth beyond the absolutely obligatory. That's what those 2 verses describe. Now, when I say that it's personal, individual, that means it's a matter of judgment, a matter of thinking about your life and your abilities, your capabilities, where you're going, where you're likely to go, and making a choice. These things, as I've told some of you before, require a good amount of self-knowledge, self-understanding. That's not easy to achieve, and that's where a person could use advice, advice of friends, advice of mentors. Mentioning mentors up until about 15 years ago always used to get me in trouble. What do you mean a mentor? Aren't you living your own life? What are you, a robot? Can't you make your own decisions? But now, with the new respected profession of life coaching, I guess people have come to realize that, yeah, I might make my own decisions, but I might botch them also. I might make very bad decisions. And to take advice from someone who's older than I am, knows more than I am, who has more understanding and sensitivity, or can simply enable me to overcome my bias, my prejudice in my own case, that's very valuable. So if a person's thinking about which way he should try to grow and extend himself, that's something which requires profound self-knowledge, going to vary from person to person. We have a great example of this in the patriarchs. The patriarchs lived according to the commandments of the Torah, even though they weren't commanded. They were not obligated. God didn't command them. He merely informed them that these will be the standards by which their descendants will live. These will be revealed to their descendants later in history, and they chose to perform them on their own. Because they said, living up to the 7 categories of Noahide laws, not 7 laws, the 7 categories, about 65, is not enough. It's not enough. My soul wants to push beyond that. It wants to develop beyond that. Indeed, this desire and this practice on their part led to a famous inquiry. Okay, so Abraham kept kosher, and he gave charity, and he practiced kashrus, and so forth and so on. What about bris milah? Circumcision. We know he didn't do that, because we know he was commanded at the age of 99 to do it, and he did it at the age of 99, and thereafter Isaac was born. So he didn't do that one. Why did he do that one? Why did he put that one off? So given what I told you, you could cook up an answer. Yeah.
If you make the covenant with Hashem, now you're obligated to do all those mitzvahs. They're no longer ideals, they're obligations.
Even after he has the bris milah, he's not obligated to keep kosher. That doesn't change. But you're going in the right direction. Going in the right direction, you just spread it too wide. Try again. That's it. What's the difference between kosher, charity, prayer, and circumcision? It's a gigantic difference between circumcision on the one hand and all those other mitzvahs on the other hand. Say again? Permanent. Okay, I guess that's the right idea. I wouldn't use that word. It's
circumcision brings you into the covenant.
Yeah, no, but that's not the point here. The point here is you can only do it once. You can only do it once. It's permanent means that once it's done, it's done. Okay, now look at the gigantic difference. I pray today. I'm praying voluntarily. I'm not required to pray. If prayer will become obligatory tomorrow, so then I'll pray tomorrow, obligatorily. I didn't lose anything by praying today. Today's not going to come back. But milah, if he does milah voluntarily, he's lost out on the possibility of doing it obligatorily. And the doing it as an obligation is a much bigger mitzvah. That's one of the reasons they say he held back. He wanted to wait till it was obligatory, so that then it will have the major status of fulfilling an obligation rather than the status of being something voluntary. But you see from the very fact that they volunteered to do the mitzvos that they felt this level is a level that's crucial to a complete spirituality, that it has to be there for the person. So as one studies the Torah and as one works on improving one's compliance with the Torah, some part should be reserved for going beyond what you're absolutely obligated to do. I have a suggestion for one type of thing to do, which I think is spiritually very, very fruitful. Many people ask, how can I develop a relationship with God? How can I feel connected to God? Here's one suggestion. It's a good question. You should ask it of other people as well. But one suggestion that I have is this. Try to do a mitzvah that nobody knows about but you and God. Nobody else knows about. Won't add to your reputation. Won't add to the way people look at you. Just you and God. When you do something privately, just between you and God, then you feel connected. Whereas if other people are looking, the fact that your motivation is diluted means that it doesn't give you that sense of connection. So, give charity when no one sees you give charity. Or when you're walking and you see someone asking for charity, doesn't know you, you don't know them, you'll never see them again. That's pretty close to anonymous. Or you're in the base medrash and nobody's around and some books are out, put the books away. When you see the lights on in this room and there's nobody here, turn the lights off. Save the yeshiva some money. Something like that. And you have a laundry here. I remember when I was dorming and did laundry. You often come, you've done your wash. Somebody else's clothes are in the dryer, and you want to use the dryer. So it's customary. Take the guy's clothes out of the dryer, put them in a basket, and put your clothes in the dryer. His clothes have dried already, so nothing wrong with that. Fold his clothes. Fold his clothes. You walk away, he'll come back and find his basket of clothes folded. He won't know that it's you. He's not going to know who came after him to do the wash. Try to do something, if you can, some mitzvah that nobody knows about. You do that, then something that you and only God know. Here's another way. This I have from my youngest son. We're talking about learning Torah Lishma, learning Torah as a mitzvah for God, not for any other reason. Subject that should be discussed more. And one of the things he suggested is this. You're learning something with your charusa, with your study partner, and it's difficult, as it often is, and you bat it around, you don't get an answer. That night, you're thinking it over, and the answer hits you. Bang! I've got it! I know the answer! Come in tomorrow and say, wow, listen to this, I've got the answer, here it is! No, don't do that. Say, you know what someone told me? You know what someone told me? He told me this was the answer. That way you don't take credit for it. You don't take credit for it. You're not beating your chest and saying how great I am. Now, nobody knows that but you and God, because you really did think it up. But you know that you're not taking credit for it. That's the way to do a mitzvah between you and God. When you do a mitzvah that's only between you and God, that's a mitzvah which gives you the sense of connection. And I don't know of any requirement to do mitzvahs like that. This is an obligation or a standard to do mitzvahs like that. It's something extra. It's a step beyond. But it's a very fruitful step beyond in spiritual terms. Anyway, that's what I wanted to tell you about standards and ideals and the relationship they have to personal growth. Any questions? Yeah.
So for certain Sfarim, it says Chavis Chaim, Shmir Salash, Sefer Chavis Chaim, like these are halachas that come from the Torah itself, or are they just as a standards, or are those, I'm understanding that. Is there a source for each and every halacha that he says?
Yes, there's a source for each and every halacha. It's interesting that you asked that. I'm not fluent in all the laws of Lashon Hara, but I think, my guess is that they're all obligatory. They're all obligatory. I don't know of any that says, well, it's okay if you don't do this, but if you do it, it's praiseworthy. In Lashon Hara, I'm not aware of any, but the person you should ask that of is Rabbi Samet. Rabbi Samet is an expert of the law of Lashon Hara, and he and his wife were safe.
Many reasons why. First of all, the reward Noam Haba is qualitatively different than Noam Hazeh, so you couldn't get it anyway. It doesn't, there's nothing here that would qualify as a reward in the Olam Haba. Besides, the amount is infinite. So how could you give somebody infinite reward here? You know what I'm saying? Okay. Everything that you get here just enables you to go on, or it gives you a greater opportunity.
Yeah, but isn't that a very depressing thought that every person hopes to live for many, many years? So basically, all the riches that he's doing is like he's putting it in a sealed bank account.
Correct. That's exactly what it is.
Better health or a job or a better shift in this world. That's erroneous. There are no rewards in Olam Hazeh.
Schar mitzvah b'hai alma leka. That's a definitive statement, absolute. Nothing that you experience in this world, even if it's phenomenal, is not considered a reward. It is considered an opportunity. For instance, if somebody all of a sudden wins $300 million lottery, that's not a reward.
You can't think they have the
No, because the reward in Olam Haba, 1 second of a reward in Olam Haba is infinitely greater than all the pleasurable moments of all mankind throughout all the generations. So how could you possibly have that type of reward? Here, you can't. Like I said, quantitatively and qualitatively, what goes on in Olam Haba is completely different. But what everything is here is an opportunity to do more mitzvahs. It provides you an opportunity to, that's what it is. I'll give you an example, for instance. Friends, imagine if you were working in a bank and you're, what do you call those guys behind the bank? Clerk. Tell us. And all of a sudden they came home and said to the person, we like what you're doing. Is this on, by the way?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah? Imagine that you said to the person, I like what you're doing, I'm going to make you a manager. Is that a reward? No. Because you have to work. Yeah, I still have to work. The only thing, it's a greater opportunity, right? Whatever that means, more money, maybe more responsibility, but now you're more in charge. That's all it is. It's an opportunity. There is no such thing as a reward.
But when you misfile for parnasa,
that's an opportunity.
It's not called a reward.
No, not at all.
It's tefillah.
It's an opportunity because if you have a parnasa, you can learn more Torah, you can do more stuff, more chesed, and so on. These are all opportunities.
So schar for einish is not possible in this world.
Einish is possible.
But that's schar.
That's schar. And the only reason why einish is possible is because to get into Olam Haba, you have to be completely Torah. You cannot get into Olam Haba and have any claims against you sin-wise. That's why everything is done before Olam Haba, whether it be here or Gilgul, Gehenim, whatever it is, has to be complete before you walk into Olam Haba. Because that is a place that...
But what it says over there, the Mishnah, El Dvar Shadam Oichel Perisayim Bel Mazeh, right? So the Oichel Perisayim is not considered reward. HaKerem HaKayemes Le'Laba, keep it up, Eid, Wills, Sadim, Ashkabas.
Yeah, those, yeah.
Those are considered rewards, or not? El Dvar Shadam Oichel Perisayim Bel Mazeh, HaKerem HaKayemes Le'Laba, Ve'el HaKib Dav, Eid, Wills, Sadim, Ashkabas, Middosh. Those are rewards?
There are no rewards in Olam Hazeh.
But so when it says El Dvar Shadam Oichel Perisayim Bel Mazeh, that's what?
That could be a consequence, let's say, for what you've done, which would allow you now to have, again, more opportunities.
Opportunities.
Yeah, but there are no rewards. That's why Keren Kayemas, the real reward can only take place in Olam Haba, not in Olam Hazeh. People make a mistake. They think, oh, wow, I'm getting great stuff because of the mitzvah I did. No. Whatever you did is allowing you a greater opportunity and so on, or maybe allow you to be easier to live, right? But then again, you have challenges and so on, But it's not the reward that awaits people in Olam Haba. That's very critical. What?
We see that tzaddikim have a better life than Rishon.
Love that. What? Yesh tzaddik v'raloi.
What do you mean? I like to meet that tzaddik. No.
Yesh tzaddik v'toiv lo yesh tzaddik
There are
v'raloi.
tzaddikim that suffer terribly.
I'm moving on to your
So
topic.
they always accept, right, that's why Shabbat questioning about brachas, but
There's no way.
most tzaddikim you see have a good life.
Do they? I don't know. I see a lot of fry guys.
He's right in the fact that a tzaddik has
A lot of
bitochus.
Shoyim have great lives.
I don't know
They have simchas chai, they have bitochus, and they have simchas chai.
Well, that's
What he says, if a tzaddik person is tzaddik, he has b'tochen.
I had gone into certain ideas. You know what the whole purpose is, what the whole avodah really is. Well, that's what we'll talk about. Anyway, what fundamentally is done, and what we realize is that, like I said, there's a concept of there's a thing called a tikkun process, and tikkun, as I have mentioned, really is obviously to correct some type of deficiency, to undo, to correct, to repair, to restore, whatever word you want to use, a deficient situation or state. But what's important to remember is that I mentioned it last week, and that is that our tachlis is to bring ore down. I had mentioned that last week, I think, whatever, right? To bring down ore, certain divine energy, to bring it down. And right now we hold it in storage because we can't use it immediately, but certainly to bring down a certain credible amount of kedusha, it's called ore or energy and so on. So that's really what our job is. And that creates zikuch, which is to purify the material world, or I should say to dematerialize it. And that itself goes greater and greater dematerializations until ultimately it becomes part of Ilam Haba. That's really what we want to do. So what we're really doing is removing the barrier that we have to experiencing the Rebbeinu Shalom. That's really what it is. Because the physical universe doesn't allow us really to experience God, the Rebbeinu Shalom, in a way that is truly incredible. So therefore we have to dematerialize. And that's, by the way, one of the reasons you'll notice there are religions that tell you to stay away from the world. Christianity is classic, and that's why they have these things called monasteries. What's a monastery? A monastery is fundamentally a place that you escape life. You go upstairs to the mountain, wherever it's located, and you meditate, you do whatever you do, and so on and so forth. But fundamentally, it's a way to avoid or to escape life. Judaism, on the contrary, all the mitzvahs force you to interact with life. Why? Because if you have to dematerialize the universe or the world, you need to interact with the world. The trick isn't to escape. What Judaism demands isn't an escape from life, right? It's to channel life and to dematerialize it.
To take out the spiritual from the material.
To take out the spiritual from...
Distill the spiritual
you could
from the material.
you could say it that way. But
Distill the materialism into spirituality.
Wait. It's to transform the material.
The Varazag in its sites, like we say.
Yeah, I'm not using that expression.
That's what the
Let's show it was more in detail, so we can go through it again.
Yeah.
It's very in detail.
Yeah, but the thing is to change or to transform a physical universe into a spiritual one. That's fundamentally, how you look at it. And therefore, what's necessary is a mitzvah, interacts with the physical world. All the mitzvahs, if you look at Shas, the Siddharma of mitzvahs and so on, there's Roim. It forces us to interact, that if you are a farmer and you have truma, maestros and so on, you need to do the mitzvah, and therefore you change the physical world in that aspect into a spiritual one. Moed, all the mitzvahs force you to interact with the world, but what they do is they restrict you, they limit you, or they force you to perform a physical act with a specific guideline, you see. So if you do that, then you interact with the physical world through the guidelines of the mitzvah, and therefore you change the physical world ultimately into a spiritual one. That's why Judaism is all about the world, not about monasteries. That's a classic difference. And of course, in the interaction itself, you have to avoid corrupting it, and that's the Yetzer Hara, where you can corrupt that what you do at a physical level in a wrong way. So that's the concept where the Satan wants you to interact with the physical world, but for yourself and in the wrong way, as opposed to mitzvah. But Judaism is very much concerned with the physical world, which is different than many other religions. They are concerned, like I said, with getting away Judaism certainly is getting into, and so on. Very big difference.
When you talk about the are you referring to the gunners?
No, I'm talking about the Or of the spheres. The Or of Gunners is different. The Or of the spheres that you bring down and you dematerialize the universe, which is something I mentioned last week.
This
Anyway.
is really different. Rabbi told me one time that the difference between all the other tzaddikim before Avram and Avram himself.
Yeah. What about it?
Something that the Mashiach Tzava, but could this also be a difference that he was the one to actually go out and make and spread Kavod Shemayim, whereas everybody else was locked in their
Well,
own?
actually, in this parsha, the reason why I like them, the reason why Avram Avinu was chosen, not because he was a tzaddik. I mean, you had lots of tzaddikim in those days. You had Mr. Shelach, Shem Be'ev, and so on. He was chosen because the Rosh knew that he would pass down the heritage of mitzvahs.
So could it be since he
to
was
his
also in
descendants.
his whole? Could also be that his whole mission in life was to spread the Kavod Shemayim, and that's essentially what. Instead of being locked away.
That's certainly. I would use that was certainly his emphasis. Yeah.
So is that included in Lamai Yitzhak?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sure. Because Bonham, Talmidim are like Bonham, so that would be included. It's not just your children; it's mankind too. Yeah. I certainly would include that. So, it's to get it out, as they say, to promote, to publicize, and so on. The whole concept. In any case, so the main idea then is to do the mitzvahs for the zikuch and so on, But as I said, if you do a chet, then the or doesn't go to you, the or goes to the son. That's a tremendous balance that we have to be concerned with and so on. So either the or is coming to us as a result of our mitzvahs, or the or is going to him as a result of our sins. And therefore the job becomes twofold. The job is no longer to bring down or the enormous amount of divine kedusha energy, right? The job is also to take away from the Satan that which we've given him. You need to get rid of you, and therefore, and that's what, by the way, energizes the Satan. What energizes the Satan is the fact that he has the or of our affairs.
When you do tshuva, you de-energize him?
Wait, that's what I'm going to talk about. Now, the question is then, well, what do? We have two jobs, okay? And how do we do the first or the second? Well, the first job, which is to bring down or, okay, is through mitzvahs. You do the mitzvahs, you bring down the or. And doing the mitzvahs depends on a lot of things. The act, the mind, the intent, right? There's certain components that go into a mitzvah, which is very important. There's the act itself, which is visible. Then there's the intent of the person, his kavanah, his focus, and so on. That's not observable. That's part of the mitzvah, which means that also determines how the quality of that mitzvah and therefore the amount of or. But there's also a third aspect, by the way, which is certainly unobservable, but it's probably greater. You might know what that is? When you do a mitzvah, like I said, there's the act itself, there's the state of mind as you're doing the act. Then there's a third component, which is even greater. Anybody can figure that out? And it's not observable, even to the person actually doing the mitzvah.
The kedusha of the person?
No. I mean, his status, kedusha status. Well, no, that would enable his kavanah. That kicks in the kavanah. No. It's an interesting idea. You know what it is? Chazal say, in fact, it's in brachos. The fum tsaro agro. What does that mean? The fum tsaro, the effort or the pain, tsaro. Agro is reward. What does that mean? What does the fum tsaro agro really mean? According to the pain, the effort, shtadlos, is the reward. Is what? Is the reward, which is mozikoch. What's that called? What gives when something gives a person tremendous difficulty, really good.
Yes, sir.
Who?
Yes, sir.
No. And you still do the mitzvah. Give me an example. You live 2 miles from the shul, right? And it's cold outside, and it's snowing, right? And all of a sudden, 6:30, the alarm rings, and you say, well, am I going to get up a minyan? Let's say you can't use your car because the snow is 2 feet high, right? So you're not going to use a car.
That's all of a sudden,
It's called a challenge.
it's serious snappish.
He got it. It's called Mesiras Nefesh, exactly.
So you're taking away from your materialism by giving
Get
away.
the consequences. Let's just understand. That's Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh is an intangible. Go measure it. Mesiras Nefesh means self-sacrifice. What are you giving up? What do you have to contend with that's painful to do this mitzvah? That's an intangible. And the guy himself doesn't really know. Maybe you can get a feel of that. But Mesiras Nefesh is part of the reward, in this case with Zikuch, but ultimately the reward Noidam Habo. It's mamish part of it. And not only that, Konta Chazal, from Sarah Agro, it's the greatest determinant. What are you giving up to do a mitzvah? That will determine much more how much reward you get than the other two, which is the act and the intent. Interesting. So there are three major components in doing a mitzvah that determine the quality, the zikuch, the dematerialization, and ultimately, of course, the reward Noidam Habo. Interesting idea. Does anybody know why? Why would Mesiras Nefesh be so important?
Because you're dematerializing
No.
more.
No, that's the consequence. Why?
Diminish one's ego.
Why is it, if you're Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, the greater the self-sacrifice, the more reward Noidam Habo? Why?
Total bittul.
Of what?
Ego. Of your neshama to the Rebbeinu Shalom back. Or the completely saying that I don't exist. I'm just whatever.
And how are you saying that?
Diminishing ego.
Who?
You diminish an ego.
Yeah, both of you are really saying it, but
You're diminishing your
You're pointing in the right
materialism, your
direction.
kashmias, by being Mesiras Nefesh.
no, it's not the Kashmirs, no. What's the problem here? Okay, what's the conflict really? In every mitzvah, what's the conflict really? Who?
I mean, you never bombs, never.
No, that's fancy stuff.
Me or
Yetzer Tov against the Yetzer Hara.
We're not up to that fancy stuff
Yetzer
yet.
Tov against the Yetzer Hara.
No.
Me or him?
That's too simple.
Me or him?
Who's me? Me?
Myself.
Who's
or
him?
God.
Oh, God. Yeah. It's the conflict of everything you do, especially when it's a mitzvah, right? Who dominates? Whose will is the real will? Therefore, who is? Do I exist independent of God if I can do whatever I want? Or it's He, Einoi V'Vadoi. Every conflict of mitzvah, every mitzvah creates that conflict. Whose will is primary? Wins. You see? So when you do the mitzvah, what are you really doing? Not only are you testifying His will, and therefore He is supreme, but you're also saying at the same time, I am subservient or nothing. So therefore, right, what is the indicator, or in what way can a person prove that he is everything and I'm nothing? What's the greatest way of demonstrating that? And the answer is
Mesiras Nefesh.
Mesiras Nefesh. That's
Don't
why.
think
You
it's
see, because Mesiras Nefesh, the greater the effort or the difficulty of doing a mitzvah, the greater is the statement of you're it and I'm zero. And the reward is totally on what you feel about yourself and what you say about him. Right? And that's the Midah Keneged Midah. To the extent that you say he is everything, you will be masik that Noidam Habo. You will get that. Therefore, Mesiras Nefesh is the real contest. You see, it's the real battle that you have to do. You see? And that's why it's the greatest reward. Because the reward itself is hasogas ichudoi, or to experience God. So the greater you deny your own self, the greater you will experience the self, the God self, so to speak. You see? And Mesiras Nefesh is the way you actually demonstrate that.
But the Basha still wants to preserve the goof to the whatever extent possible.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying no. No, I'm just saying, why is Mesiras Nefesh why is that the greatest determinant of reward? And the answer is, since reward is Einoi V'Vadoi, is to experience God. The greatest way to experience God, right, is to deny. It comes from the greatest denial of self.
What was Moshe?
Worth.
Mesiras Nefesh?
Moshe Rabbeinu.
He was a bittul of whatever himself. completely.
Yes, he was.
But that was called Mesiras Nefesh, what he did?
No. Moshe Rabbeinu's understanding of the Rebbeinu Shalom came from the hasaga of being a Navi. If you're a Navi and God talks to you, you immediately know what the truth is. You're zero. You feel you're zero.
So you don't need Mesiras Nefesh in that case?
You do. Moshe Rabbeinu's Mesiras Nefesh was the first 80 years.
Also,
First 80 years of his life.
B'cheina Mesifra Secha is also Mesiras Nefesh.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it wasn't Mesiras Nefesh in the last 40. Of course there was. But the real Mesiras Nefesh was to remain who he was until he's 80 years old. The guy's 80 years old, they think it's over with.
So you're saying Mesiras Nefesh
Nothing serious is going to happen after this. But the funny thing about it is that's when he first began to live, when he was 80. Everything before 80 was insignificant. It's only after 80 that he really got, life began.
So we're not talking Mesiras Nefesh of death, we're saying Mesiras Nefesh on a mental basis.
Yeah. That's still Mesiras Nefesh.
I'm saying, okay.
You wake up in the morning when you're very tired and it's cold, that's Mesiras Nefesh.
But by Moshe Rabbeinu, to remain who you were at 80, to remain who you were at 80 years old, and remain what? Unbelievable Mesiras Nefesh. To be among the goyim.
Avraham Avinu, he was Shloshel Avila.
Wait. No. Anyway, to remain that way is the greatest Mesiras Nefesh. But anyway, wait, I want to go on. Anyway, I'm just trying to give you a feel of some of the vital elements in doing the avodah and so on. Okay, so the question then is, how do we take out the stuff from the Satan? So mitzvahs brings down the ore. The way you take it out of the Satan is through two other ways. Tshuva. Tshuva, when you repent or undo, essentially, you can take it out of the hands of the Satan. And the second of that is Yisurim. When you suffer, the Satan also is depleted. When you suffer also. So you have three avodas. Mitzvahs, Tshuva, and Yisurim. All three ultimately will bring ore, just that they bring ore from different directions.
Tshuva is separate than mitzvahs.
Yes, tshuva is you did a sin, and now you have to do tshuva.
Yeah, but it is a mitzvah.
What?
It is a mitzvah.
Yes, it happens to be a mitzvah, yes. But it's different than all other mitzvahs, because it always comes after a chet.
And also can turn around the Aveira into a mitzvah.
Well,
Tshuva miyava becomes a mitzvah.
I'm not going into the actual description of what tshuva does and so on, but that's what basically
Part of
tshuva
what the
does.
Satan does.
Therefore, what?
Part of what the Satan does is to bring pain and destruction. When he does that to the world, people, countries, does he lessen his own power in creating pain and suffering?
Well, it depends. In a certain sense, yes.
He might.
In a certain sense, yes. Yeah. But the gain by that is if he gives suffering to a person, that person may say, well, why am I suffering? God's unfair, and then I'm going to do more chatoim. There's a trade-off here. He's hoping that
he's investing his
he's hoping that
into more
They get angry.
Well, he's hoping that
he's hoping that the payoff will be more.
Challenge someone's faith in Hashem.
Anyway,
Okay.
so that's so you have that. Now, if that's the case, there's something very important to know. I had mentioned that we have Tiferes and Oiz. We have beauty and might, Gvura, Oiz, which translates as Tiferes is beauty in the sense of insight, Chokhmah, tremendous wisdom, know-how. That's Tiferes. And Oiz is strength, might, or Hatzlacha, the ability to do. Now, we have it, so when Klal Yisrael is doing the mitzvahs, so they will have Tiferes and Oiz. When they do the Averis and then the Satan has it, he will get the Tiferes and Oiz. So it's interesting. You can actually see who's winning by who's got the Tiferes and Oiz. Isn't that interesting? It becomes a barometer. Take a look at who's got the Tiferes and Oiz, and you know either we've done all the sins, we've done too many sinning, right, and he's got majority, or we've done so many mitzvahs, we've got it. So if that's the case, you begin to realize certain things. There are two modes in terms of, there are two methods that can do the tikkun in a certain sense, And the Rebbe had to arrange this. If you do mitzvahs, you will do the tikkun by bringing down the ore through the mitzvahs, right? But what happens if you don't do mitzvahs? What happens if you do sinning a majority of the time? Then you also have to do the tikkun. Same thing. You see, by Adam Rishon, when he sinned, or before he sinned, so his job is to do the tikkun. How? By doing the mitzvahs. But what happens if Adam sins, which is what he did? There has to be a way to do the tikkun through sinning, in the sense of Yisurin. There has to be a way. And that's what happened. There's method A and method B. So method A is when Klal Yisrael is in a situation where they're primarily doing mitzvahs. Therefore, they have the Tferes V'Oyos. And you'll notice that was when? That was from the time of Avraham Avinu. He had the Tferes V'Oyos. Kings used to come over to me. They wanted to marry into his family. You see that Hagar was an Egyptian princess. It's interesting, And it was better to be a slave in the house of Avraham than to be a queen, which is incredible when you think about that. And you find that this concept of Tferes V'Oyos, that the Jews had this, Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, you know what I'm saying? And certainly they lost it to a certain extent by Mitzrayim, but then they gained it, by Yeshua, then the Shlomo Melech. The Klal Yisrael was on the ups until the destruction of the first place of Mikdash. That's when you begin to see that the Tferes V'Oyos switched. And we have been losing it since then.
And we regained that to the Second World War a little bit, no?
Second World War?
Yeah.
Come on now?
Yeah.
That's a good point, which we'll, just hold on to that point, yeah. But you can actually look at, which method are we primarily in?
By Shaftim, it was going back and forth. We're getting captured by foreign Aram or whoever it was, and then the Shaftim came and rescued them back and forth. The Shekhinah was going back and forth?
No, the fact that we have wars isn't an indication. It's the status of the civilization of Jews.
They were subjugated from time to time.
Well, you had, so you had a back and forth, but it wasn't as devastating. Golus is the ultimate. The Golus, the persecutions, the Inquisitions, the Crusades. That's what Tferes V'Oyos is in the hands of the Goyim. And that because we have been continuously subjected to their might and their beauty, civilizations and so on. That already means that the Tferes V'Oyos primarily is in that, and therefore we have to do the tikkun to a method B as opposed to method A. But so as long as it's back and forth, that's one thing. But we've been running for the last 2,000 years. That we're not talking here anymore about Tferes V'Oyos in our hands. We're not talking about Tferes V'Oyos in the hands of Goyim. You see, so it comes out that Tferes V'Oyos, who has this, really is a result of, what's the method? So if we do the mitzvahs, we bring the ore down, we're going to have the Tferes V'Oyos. If we're not doing that method, we're doing method B, which is to do what? Which is, we're sinning, and therefore the only way we're going to get this back is basically choose by Yisurim. So we're to method B, we won't have the Tferes V'Oyos. So by looking where the Tferes V'Oyos is, you can actually see which method is primary. And clearly for the last 2,000 years, or for the last 2,500 years, the Tferes V'Oyos has been in the hands of the Goyim, primarily. And we have been in Golus.
So just having the Beis Hamikdash alone.
What was that?
Just having the Beis Hamikdash alone is not an indicator it's Tferes V'Oyos?
Well, to a certain extent it is, but it's already diminishing. Because in the second Beis Hamikdash you didn't have the Oren, it's already beginning to lose.
The time of the first Beis Hamikdash, when they had all those things, then it was called Tferes V'Oyos.
Yeah, probably one of the greatest groups of Tferes V'Oyos was Shlomo Melech. Shlomo Melech, he was like everybody, he was king, he had 700 wives, and they were all to ally himself with other kings and all that. Whatever, no. So the Tikuf of Shlomo Melech and so on, this was... Well, it continued, it continued, when Jews had a kingdom, when Jews had a kingdom, we had Tferes V'Oyos. Yeah, we'd always be warring with other nations and so on. Jews had a war with themselves.
That was the apex of the Tferes V'Oyos.
Yeah, so the first more or less 1,000 years, the Jews had the Tferes V'Oyos, back and forth. It's only with the Churban by Sheni, that's when the whole thing just fell apart. And they took the Tferes V'Oyos. Then you had the major religions of Christianity and Islam and so on. and the Jews then were just gullus again and again, all kinds of persecutions and all that. That was the beginning of the end of the first, the primary first Rioyas. You see, so therefore the taking proceeds one of two ways, and based on the first Rioyas, which is what you get when you have the or, this is what you say. So therefore we begin to see that there are two fundamental stages of Klal Yisrael. When they have the first Rioyas, mainly doing the mitzvahs, so they bring down the or. When they don't have the first Rioyas, Satan's got it, persecutions and exile and crusades and Holocaust and all the kinds of stuff.
According to what you're saying, the time of Gullus where the persecutions are more extreme, there's more tikkun getting done. So looking at the broader perspective, the Holocaust was a better time than we are in.
No, I didn't say no. I certainly would say it's better.
I mean, there's more tikkun, more yisurim. If Plan B is going full force.
The reason why there's more yisurim is because there's more sins that you got to collect, that you got to make up for. I wouldn't call that better. It's much more sins that Klal Yisrael have done. I mean, the Holocaust is one of the greatest indicators that Klal Yisrael must have had an unbelievable amount of chatoim. You know, to justify that type of yisurim. You know. I mean, part of the idea, which unfortunately people have noted this, you know, probably I would venture a guess. The substantial reason for the Holocaust, in terms of the fact that the first and always is in the hands of the Sultan. I mean, remember that's the parameter, right? And the fact that the Sultan he's urinating enormous amount of kedusha. But then we look at that, therefore Klal Yisrael has a yisurim. Right? I would say the primary reason why the Holocaust was so devastating is the results of the Reformed movement. Yeah. These guys have been going on since Mendelssohn, you know, and they have removed the Reform movement in Western Europe, and that's an American movement, and the Haskalah, which is basically Russia and the East and so on, they were absolutely devastating to Europe. What they did is they took Jews, I mean, who was how many hundreds of thousands of Yidden became reformed or maskilim and so on. You know, it was a tremendous movement. And I would venture to say that the amount of chatoim, I would venture to say that the amount of sins that were added in that time was enormous. Now, I'm not saying that's the only reason for Holocaust. I believe one of the primary ideas of the Holocaust, I mean, there are many ways of thinking about it, is that to undo an enormous amount of awe that the Sultan had, not just because of the last 200-300 years, but for the last 2,000 years. It's like we need to balance the books. Because when the Mashiach is very close, you need to balance the books. You need to get rid of all the complaints, you know, against the Jews, which is the Chatoim and all the Kitudim, you know, and we're looking at 2,000 years of complaints. You know, that has to be, so before Mashiach comes, that has to be balanced. So probably the Holocaust was one of the greatest events in history that would balance the books, what we would actually call accelerate the process of kapora, to accelerate the process of kapora and oynish. Really accelerated. That's why what was done by the Holocaust from 1939 to 1945, 6 years, it's probably more yisurim, more evil that was done in those 6 years than perhaps in 1,000 years of Jewish history. And the reason why is the Rosh wants to accelerate the process. He wants to balance the books and get rid of a lot of stuff that the Jews were indebted to, and so on, to, you know. So that's why you had the Holocaust.
Can you say
that's one of the reasons. There are others.
Can you say some people were sacrificed? For example, it's like a communal kapara in that if someone was killed in the Holocaust and someone survived, you can't say the one who survived had greater merits.
No.
So some people could be picked at random, even though they may be righteous.
No, it's not a matter of
part of this national.
No, it's not a matter of random. It's not random. But like the Gemara says in Bava Kama, that when there's a tremendous kitrugim, then even tzaddik is taken away before. That's why it's interesting. You find many tzaddikim died in the 30s. Chofetz Chaim, Chaim Wasserman, there's a lot of tzaddikim that were gone already in the 30s because the Russian didn't want them to see, and so on. But one of the ideas
in the 40s.
Who?
By the Nazis.
Yeah, during the whole.
But probably the early part of it. I think so. I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah,
they died in the 30s.
You're saying that the people who were left after the household benefited. We benefit by their Yisurim.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, when Tzaddik dies, there's a tremendous kapara.
Is that this week's Parsha, Kanti Safar?
I believe that's why we have a couple of tzaddikim died just recently. Rabbi Yashu's last year, Rabbi Van Yosef this year. I believe the reason why they died is to protect Christ for what's about to happen. It's about to happen. It's not good. And these people, by their death, we know that because we see that kaparas miracle. So
last week.
What?
Last week was unbelievable.
Anyway,
that's this week's Parsha, Kanti Safar. It was Lot. It won't be grabbed into the.
But I want to just mention as an agat, since we're talking about the Holocaust. So one of the ideas of Holocaust, again, remember, it's method B. The first and ois is not in our hands, so we experience a tremendous amount of Yisur and Golus and so on, right? And a lot of, I'm saying the first idea behind that was the concept of accelerating the process to get rid of all the claims against the Jews, all the chatoim and so on. So what the Moshe did is he just did it and said, okay, 6 years, and that was an unbelievably intense Golus Yisurin period of time. Yeah, but that's only one thing that was accomplished. I'll mention one more. Go on. The second thing that was accomplished, that before the Mashiach comes, there has to be an incredible chusha, darkness. In fact, you see that from the second pasuk in Chumash, where it says, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters, right? But what was on top of the face of the waters? And the answer is choshech, because there was no or yet. So the Baal HaTurim has a gematria that Ruach Elokim Rachefes, the gematria, Zuhi Rucha Shel Melech HaMashiach. This is gematria, you know. And what that means is that if it's method B, which is, remember, first knows about a Sultan, he's got the ore, we got to take it back, and so on. Then the Mashiach will come in the midst of incredible darkness, which is absence of ruchnius. That's where it says that there will be an incredible hunger, thirst, and it's not for mayim or for food, it is for Hashem. And we live in that time. So how do you create this darkness?
Why do you need the darkness?
Wait, how do you create it? The answer is you take out Klal Yisrael. Because every Jewish neshama is an unbelievable ore, right? And we know miyat or doichahach min hachoshech. If you walk into a dark room, you walk in with a candle. It takes away a lot of the darkness. It's for the amount of light coming out of a little candle in a dark room. It's way out of proportion to the amount of light that it lends to the room. So therefore, every Jewish neshama is a sakana for or. It's interesting, you know. So therefore, the Baruch Shem said, "Listen, Mashiach is going to come soon. I got to make this place dark. We're not going into why, right? And as a result of that, I got to take out the Jews. So it's not just 6 million Jews that died. It's 6 million Jews of the cream, you know, of the cream of Jewry. Or you're talking about, you know, the even Western Europe, part of Eastern Europe, and so on. The Torah centers, they're just wiped out, you know. The Gedolim, the Tzaddikim. So what the Baruch Shem did, which is interesting, normally you would see a deterioration of Ruchnius. 500 years. Tanoim, the period of Tanoim was what? 300 years? Then you had the period of Amoraim. You know, you had the Zugas and so on, Tanoim. Amoraim lasted 300 years, 350, right? Then you had the Rabbanim Sfoiroim. These are all different kufas. Then you had the Goinim lasted a couple hundred years. Rishonim was a couple hundred years, right? And now we're in the period of the Achronim, and so on. You know, you notice that in order for you to distinguish the diminishment or the descent of Ruchnius, it's 400 years. But if you take a look, the difference between the Holocaust, before the Holocaust, the level of Ruchnius, and after the Holocaust today, it's staggering. So what the Rosh did, and that's what the acceleration is, he decreased the amount of ore in 6 years, what it should have taken 500 years. No, it's the natural evolution of the diminishment of ore.
Why is that necessary?
Would have taken hundreds of years, and the way the Baruch Hashem did it so rapidly was the Holocaust. So that's an idea number 2, is that the Mashiach has to come in the midst of unbelievable darkness. And therefore the Holocaust served that purpose.
There's no other way of Mashiach to come.
Wait, no, there is. Through mitzvahs. That's the concept of either Ein Ben David Bo, what? Either the Chayom or Zakoim, or Kul Chayom, Kulum Zakoim. Yeah, so method B is Kulum Chayom. That's what I'm saying. There's 2 ways to do the tikkun. There are 2 ways that the Mashiach comes. It's either method A, right, or method B. Method A, by the way, is also Anhogas HaMishpat. It's also the Anhog of Mishpat where the Moshe responds justice. Then there's Anhogas HaYichud, which I didn't talk much about, which is that the way the Russian behaves to the Bria is totally mysterious. There's no rhyme or reason, which I'll mention and so on, But in any case, we are now in a tekufa of incredible darkness. The Tiferes and Ois of mankind is beyond our understanding how little Jews really have, although now it seems to be getting more and more, right? So what the Holocaust did, again, a second primary idea, was it not only accelerated the process, but created what should have taken hundreds of years, because that's how long it takes for you to see the diminishment of ore, of stature, of ruchnius. And it happened in 6 years. The difference between us now, before the war, and now it's much worse, with the deceasement, the death of many Kedolim in the last 10 years. It's shreklach what's going on. You look around and say, excuse me, who's around anymore? What's around anymore in all areas of Yiddishkeit? And that's what happens in the end. That the darkness, Ramchal has its way of saying, that before the Mashiach comes, the blinds, the windows, which is the blinds will be shut. Mamish down to where you ever see, imagine you have a window that's painted black, and you shut it down, and you don't see anything, and you leave just a little open. A thin strip of light that's left. That's what happens before Mashiach comes. It's ad v'loy ad bichlal. If that window's shut, the bria is over. It's gone. Everything is annihilated. So what's left is that little thin stream of light, and within that darkness, the Mashiach will come. So the Holocaust was able to do that. But in any case, so we have that what we begin to see is that the concept of who has the Tiferes and Ois is a barometer at what method is being employed to bring the tikkun, and where does Klal Yisrael stand, where does the Satan stand vis-a-vis that. It's an important idea, that's all, when you see the concept of Tiferes and Ois, are you smoking?
No, it's an e-cigarette.
Oh, okay. An e-cigarette? What is that?
Vapor. It's vapor.
It's water vapor.
It's water vapor.
It's
not nicotine and all that stuff.
No.
There's nicotine in it, but there's no, it's only nicotine.
You don't have secondhand.
There's no secondhand.
There's no secondhand.
There is some things.
There is?
They just came out with it, yeah. I don't know what brand you have, but they're not so big on those anymore, unless someone's trying to quit, not as an alternative.
Oh, you mean there is nicotine in that?
There's nicotine in it.
So I have to ask you to put it out.
My pleasure.
What?
I'll stop, my pleasure.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Does that mean
Anyway.
that we open yeshiva today, that we active yeshiva more people are running?
Well, let me tell you what method B produces. Okay, what does it produce, There are 3 components. When the Jews go into the klipa, as they say, or they go, where they go into where the Tiferes and Ois is taken away from them, then certain things happen. One, the Tiferes and Ois goes to the Goyim. So the Goyim themselves become the greatest ma'akvim, the greatest intruders or people who destroy, annihilate the ability of a person to be from, and so on. By the way, anybody know what Golos really means vis-a-vis the individual? What does it mean to be in Golos, really?
To be controlled, under control of the...
To be controlled, that's certainly true, but that's, no. There's something more profound.
Not in your natural
Separated from your...
Well, it's true. That's not what it
Not
is.
your habitat.
Well, you just said that in different words. What does it mean to really to be in Golos? Or what's the defining moment of being in Golos? It's true. To be under the jurisdiction, the control of others, no question about that.
Separation.
Subjugation.
It's all the same word, you know.
Cut off from our disconnect.
Not being your full potential.
Hey, that's
being who you
interesting.
are.
What?
Not being able to be who you are.
Very good. That's what it is. What Golos really is, and of course it's brought about by other control. What it means to be in Golos, it means that whatever your potential is, too bad. It means that you can't be who you really can be. And even what you are, it comes with enormous struggle. Of course, that comes about, or the mechanism that is used to inhibit your growth is the fact that you're under the control of others. Of course. You know, that's what we think of Golos, you know, subjugation or whatever. And that's what it obviously is. But that's not what Golos is. The primary concept of Golos is that you cannot be what you can be. You know, there's an army advertisement. You ever see? What the army advertises? Yeah, it's a gewaldige concept. Be what you can be. No, does that mean you got to join the army for this, right? What?
Israeli army?
No, American army. You know, be what you can be. Most people go through their whole lives. How many people are what they really are, what they could have been? Maybe 1% of mankind does it. 99% of mankind never makes it. You know, but the concept of Golos is terrible because it means, in many ways, that no matter how much you struggle, you can't be all you can be. There's an incredible impediment, and basically, it's the Goyim. It's certainly an unbelievable impediment because they're killing Jews and they don't allow Jews to daven mitzvahs, Greeks. You can't do Milah, Torah. I mean, it's beyond belief what these guys have done, you know. So you could do it, but there's an unbelievable difficulty in doing it. But that's as far as I'm concerned, the true meaning of Golos is the inability to achieve a ruchnistic state that you could really achieve had you not had all these incredible impediments, you know, and so on. That's what Golos in the end really is. And so on. And that's really, so to have Tferes and Ois isn't just a gift to have might. You know, it's really that which you need to do what you can do. You need Chokhmah. You need Hatzlacha, and then you can be successful. If you don't have Tferes and Ois, if they're given to Goyim, you can't be what you can be. You just don't have the wherewithal to do it. A very important concept. We get to see at Tferes and Ois, which is, like I said, Oiti Yisrael b'Sephora, Ois Yisrael b'Gvura. Right? In the brachas in the morning, that's the only time that the brachas use the word Yisrael, is critical, necessary, because that allows you to be ruchni. That's why the Baruch gives it to us. He wants to give us the ability to access chokhmah and to access hatzlacha. Then, okay, you have to want to do it, fine. But if you want to do it, no problem. But when we don't have that first noise, watch out. We can't be what we can be. And if we achieve some level, it's with unbelievable difficulty.
Is Tferes and Ois restricted?
Which, by the way, requires greater Mesiras Nefesh. And Mesiras Nefesh is one of the things that determine the amount of reward in Haba. Mesiras Nefesh, which we
Is Tferes and Ois restricted to people who are Shemitah mitzvahs and someone who's not Shemitah mitzvahs? That he can have Tferes and Ois, but it's not the Tferes and Ois that we need. You have a Nobel laureate, trying out.
That's chemistry. There's 3 Jews.
I'm saying, but that's Tveres noise.
Yeah, sure, of course.
But that's not Tveres noise that's going to bring it. It's almost like having a guy having the Tveres noise.
That's exactly what they're having. Goyim, Western civilization is Tveres noise. It's exactly what it is. You want to experience it emotionally? Just walk down Fifth Avenue. Don't walk down Rehov Yafo. That's not the Tveres noise. Sorry,
Imitation.
Who?
Imitation.
Wannabes.
Wannabes, right?
That's what it is, You walk down Fifth Avenue, it's just beyond belief with that. Or you walk down the Champs-Élysées in Paris. Or you walk down, what's the main street in London? I don't know what the main street, over there. You walk around, it's, wow, this is Tveres noise. It's not just, it's just, the level of sophistication, it's like, in fact, it's funny, I once gave a shiur in a city which is probably one of the greatest Tveres and Ois of all. And I went to that city to give a Shabbaton. Okay. And, so the place I gave it was like 10 miles from this place, it's in the same city. And I had to go just to that city. Eschotosi obisi poshanti. What does it say? Eschotoya animaske ayoim. But I went to do it because I had to see what is Tveres v'ois biyat son, in the hands of the enemy. And of course, what's the name of the city? Las Vegas. I mean, you walk down what's called the Strip, I mean, did you ever walk into a building that cost $2 billion? It's a building. It costs $2 billion. Yeah, it's the Wynn or whatever. There's the Bellagio, the Wynn. I mean, those guys have been there. It's beyond belief. The opulence, the wealth, the display. The display of materialism is beyond belief. That's Tveres v'ois. That's what it is. In what they want to be Tveres v'ois, of course. That's not what we want. Our Tveres v'ois is unbelievable majesty in Torah. Tzidkus, avodah, and so on. But if you're fry, that's their Tveres v'ois. Las Vegas is one of the greatest cities in the world that demonstrate the Tveres v'ois of their doing. New York City is another classic. I mean, these cities demonstrate unbelievable Tveres v'ois. And so on. Anyway, I don't want to get too far involved with this, but...
What does that have to do with the Shekhinah being
the networks, the movies, the this,
the Shekhinah is a vessel of Tveres and Ois?
The essential attributes of the Shekhinah is Tveres and Ois. Ask yourself, what are the 2 major attributes that you need to do anything? Wisdom, reality. You need to know reality, A. And B, you have to interact with that reality to the extent that you want to. That's all it is. You got to know what's out there, and you got to be able to do what you want to do. That's Tveres, knowing, and doing is Ois. Hatzlach is Ois, exactly. That's it. The greatest Tveres and Ois of all is Shekhinah, because the Shekhinah is reality, and it's got the Ois. In fact, in this week's Parsha, by when he told Sarah, you're going to have a kid, right? She's 90 years old. So the Moshe said, Hayipolim Hashem Dova? You mean something that's too far from me? Or the classic Hayad Hashem Tikso? Is the hand of God short? What is that? That's Ois. That's incredible. That's omnipotence is infinite Ois. And Chochmah, the Moshe, is the reality. Chochmah, what is wisdom? Well, knowledge is nothing more than the apprehension of reality. That's all it is, and so on, So we have those gifts from the Bosham. Tveres v'ois. What he has, we have, because we're part of the Shekhinah. Our problem is we need that. Why? Because then we can become Ruchni. With the Tveres and Ois, we can become Ruchni. You don't have the Tveres v'ois, you ain't going anywhere, as they say. And that's the contest. Who has it, really?
But in Golis we can have the Tveres and Ois also. No?
We do have.
But Vaida Yosef and Eliashiv had Tveres and Ois. No? Even though they were in Golis.
They certainly had Tveres. Ois, they had it in a certain sense, yes. In terms of individualistically, yes. But I'm talking about on a Klal Yisrael level. Remember, there's Tveres v'ois on an individual, and there's Tveres Yisrael and Klal Yisrael. It's 2 different levels, right? So individually, there are people that have Tveres v'ois. There's no question about that. But on a national level, of the Klal, the Rabbim, First V'yois? No way. And so on, you know. So you can have individuals that have it, yeah, but not on a national. And that's really where we need it, nationalistic. So therefore, the concept of, so Goyim, they're the classic inhibitors, right, of Ruchnius, Hatzmach and Ruchnius, which is incredible when you think about that. But that's what their job is.
They say in every generation there's a designated Mashiach that may
Yes.
go here. Well, it seems like, you know, we need a boost because if you look at all the Yidden, I'd say 1% only know about Torah and mitzvahs. How many know about Torah education and mitzvahs? And if you look at the Gashmias, even though we're less than 1% of the bigger population,
Are you asking a question?
Yeah, I was just making a comment though. Our influence in Gashmias, the Jews behind starting Las Vegas and the networks and the movies. How is 1%? What are the Torah observant Jews? What percentage of all Yidden? How are we supposed to accumulate enough for the whole Klal Yisrael? Because we're not all on the same page.
No, there are individuals, like I say, individually there are differences, but on a national level, we don't have the first place.
Even if you remove the other nations and just look at Yidden, we have people like, oh, those are religious people, they're fanatics, and we don't wear techelis, and that group's the next thing to Christianity.
Well, that's different.
How are we supposed to make headway on it?
You're bringing in other stuff, you know. I'm just trying to stick to a theme so far, you know. But anyway, so the first inhibitors, the great inhibitors, are the Goyim. Who's the second great inhibitors?
Erev.
Very good, the Erev Rav. Erev Rav. They stop us. You take a look what's going on in Eretz Yisrael. Those guys, and they're the Erev Rav, obviously, and so on, you know. We all know who that means, the government of Israel and so on, you know. They want to send guys to the draft. I mean, that's the end of it, take away money. I mean, without going into the arguments, that's the classic inhibitors of Teres V'Yos. So the Erev Rav, you know, these are one of the great, and those are Jews doing it to Jews, right? That's the second emissary of the Satan to destroy the Teres V'Yos, or rather to destroy the ability of Klal Yisrael. There's a third, which I am not going to talk about, other than just mention it. It's very hard to believe because it's a Zoya. There's the Erev Rav Rabba, and the Erev Rav Zira, the small Erev Rav. That's very interesting. There's a small Erev Rav that's not the Rabba. You know, they're not the friar guys. There's Erev Rav Zira, and those are religious Jews. Yes. There are religious Jews that inhibit the growth of Klal Yisrael. You know, and so on, without getting into what and so on. Well, I don't, you know, there's in many ways, Sinas Chinam is one of the classics that they manifest. There are many from Yidden, unfortunately, that destroy Klal Yisrael because they have power. First V'Yos, they actually have that, you know, and they destroy because of enormous Sinas Chinam. It's the whole contest between groups of Jews. Well, you're not this and you're not that. I'm sorry, you're not a... I don't want to get into the whole thing because that's very controversial, obviously, and so on. But there's a lot of, unfortunately, from Yidden that are really, you know, they're great inhibitors. They're called the Erev Rav Zira, the little Erev Rav, you know. But they are part of that mix that inhibit Klal Yisrael because of Sinas Chinam, and there's a lot of that stuff now.
So Zohar that said that, you said?
I think so. It's Erev Rav Zira. It identifies Zohar.
What is that? They identify as from Jews as the Erev Zira?
Yeah. In fact, somebody once showed me, I didn't see it, but he said that there's Sanza Rov, Sanza, Divrei Chaim, you know, that one of the Hashmatas in the back of his safe or whatever, that actually says that a lot of people that we would never believe, Mamasha Erev Rav people, it was word Fruma people, that the Mamasha Erev Rav, he says, in his day, look at some 150 years ago, forget today, forget it, you know, without going into who, what, where, when, why.
How can we identify that?
Well, I am not going to do anything beyond what I just said.
Let's go get them.
But the main... Let's go what?
Let's go get them.
But let me ask you...
You want to get under the radar.
Can a person honestly...
You don't want it.
Could a personally honestly say...
But I can just tell you, one of the major weapons that they use, which has always been that way with Klal Yisrael, is sinas chinam. There's an enormous amount of, I don't know if I'd call it hatred. I don't know if I'd use that word. It's a very strong term. But certainly arrogance, where I'm somebody special, and who are you? Because you don't measure up to my standard or whatever, and so on. So as a result of that, they do a lot of acts that clearly inhibit a lot of people from growing in ruchnius. They're part of the Erev Rav. Except they're called the Erev Rav Zeira, the smaller one, and so on. That's what I want to talk about with them.
What are they, a club? I mean, every person, anybody say he's never had sinas.
No, it's not.
I mean, the people have to work on
I think I was talking about
you know what I mean?
chronic.
No.
So,
the Erev Rav Zeira. Well, let me ask something. We know who's the Erev Rav? Is it the Reformed? Is it the people who are Reformed Jews? No. People are Reformed Jews or conservative or Reconstructionist Jews or secular Jews. They're not Erev Rav. It's the leaders who are the Erev Rav. Well, what does the people know? They don't know. What do they know? They're sheep led to the slaughter. So, it is the leaders who either are backed by a crazy ideology or there's sinas chinam or arrogance, pure gaiva and so on. They are the Erev Rav. So obviously everybody has sinas chinam, I mean, in different levels of it. You don't like this guy, you don't like that. Whatever it is, But you're not, you don't join that club because, big deal, what can you do? But it's when you're able to seriously intervene and what he called inhibit growth of ruchnius by many Yidden because of whatever you have, sin or arrogance or geus or whatever and so on and so forth. That's an Erev Rav. That's what they are. So, these Klal Yisrael is not Erev Rav. It is the leaders that are Erev Rav. But anyway, I'll get more into that. But anyway, now, what happens in a period? What happens in a period of method B, which is the first V'ois in the Goyim, then you have the Goyim, the Erev Rav, and so on. What happens? What's our understanding in many ways of the Rebbeinu Shalom, which is itself very interesting. So the first thing is that the tikkun that the Rebbeinu Shalom has to perform in that kufa is irrational. The Rebbeinu Shalom looks like he's irrational, and therefore you maharif this midas. See, this doesn't make any sense. In fact, today is the classic. Today is the classic story, and that's really why it happened, of the Rebbeinu Shalom presenting himself as irrational. You know what irrationality is? To be irrational means something which is mutually exclusive. Something cannot be A and B at the same time. You know what I'm saying? That's there's certain laws of what's called transcendental being. Something cannot be A and not A at the same time. It's impossible. That's irrational. It can't be night and day at the same time, and so on. That's called irrational. And in today's parsha, we had the classic nisoyon of the Rebbeinu Shalom appearing as an irrational God. Anybody know what I'm referring to? The Akedah. Why was it irrational?
Meaning he's going to have descendants.
Well, B'Yitzchak, B'Yitzchak, Chazar. Yeah. Here the Rebbeinu Shalom tells him, right, forget it, don't worry about Yishmael, right? So, okay, throw the guy out, right? But because Yitzchak Chazorah, that's not why you have to throw Yishmael out, because Yitzchak, no. But obviously, if he stops him from being your Zerah, you got to throw him out, right? So wait a minute, this makes no sense. It's impossible. Why? Because the Rebbeinu says on one side, Yitzchak Chazorah, that Yitzchak, you will have descendants, and there will be Yitzchak. And the other side, he says, bring them up for an oilah, shech them. That's impossible. And the Rebbeinu will not do that. The Rebbeinu cannot issue two commandments which are completely exclusive of each other. He can do whatever he wants, but he's not going to do that. So the first question is, did he in fact do that? And the answer is, of course not. Because he never said to Shech Yitzchak, he said, V'ha'aleu li'oila, just bring him up, put him on the mizbeach, and then take him off. Nowhere does it say to kill Yitzchak. It doesn't say V'shachteu li'oila. So the Moshe, in effect, never issued a command which is impossible to do. or two different nevuos.
So why didn't Avraham Avinu realize that?
No, he didn't, because when you say bring him up as an oilah, obviously the
but it was
implication
in
is
contradiction to what he told them before.
Wait,
so you should have drawn that conclusion too. That's just to be
no. The Moshe said bring him up as an oilah. We assume it means to bring him up as an oilah completely, and of course that's not what the Moshe said, but that's what he interpreted. So therefore, that came to Avraham Avinu. What's wrong? Yeah, it's not a bad idea. Yeah. So that came across. Well, Avraham Avinu interpreted that as completely rational.
But he didn't question.
Well, he didn't. Well, so that was the incredible thing. He didn't question it, which is unbelievable. Not only he didn't question it, he got up early in the morning to do it. Wow. So he could have dilly-dallied the whole day and said, well, I don't see. I got to eat breakfast first, and then I got do my gym and work out a little. It's like he got up in the morning and went. Why? The question then is that the explanation? Right. Why would Moshe do that? Would I ever want to test? No, we know it's a test, but why that type of test? Why? There's many tests that the Moshe can do. But most of them involve unknown. We don't know why the Moshe did it. But the Moshe is always rational. You know what I'm saying? There's always a reason. But there cannot be a tzivoy which is fundamentally contradictory to each other in real terms. So the real question is, why would he do that? Why would he test Avram with a classic or an incredible test called irrationality? And you know what the answer is? What I think? Because this last test, when Avraham Avinu will pass it, it will enable us to have the schus of the Rebbeinu Shalom being irrational to us, or apparently being irrational to us. What does that mean? Because in the end of time, when the Tiferes V'Oyez goes into the hands of the Goyim, it looks so crazy, we can't believe what's happening. You see, we cannot believe what's happening. To us, it appears as if the Rebbeinu is irrational. So what the Rebbeinu said to Avraham Avinu is, because you withstood the test of rationality, that schus allows me to appear to them as irrational, and therefore, even though of course it's not, but appear that way, and that will save my Israel. There's a very interesting Rishna, Yisromi Rishna. Have I ever heard of him? The Rishna, B'yan Chasidim, Rishna, Chokra, all these, all come from Rishna. He said two very interesting statements, which I think beautifully defines what happens in the end of days, which is really what we're going through. The first thing he said is that at the end of time, the test that a Jew will be subjected to will be greater than the Akedas Yitzchak. That's incredible, isn't it? In other words, what we are going through now is greater than the Nisoyin that Avraham Avinu had, Akedas Yitzchak, which is unbelievable. That's how, and therefore, the reward that every Jew has for holding on will be beyond belief. You see. Now, the question then is, well, what was the test of Avraham Avinu by the Akedah? And the answer is irrationality. It's irrational, right? Therefore, what he's saying is, at the end of time, it will be the test of rationality. The Holocaust borders on that test. It's irrational. In fact, the Rosh aids and abets the Germans, right? And meanwhile, he's destroying Klal Yisrael, and so on. So that test of irrationality saves the Jews. That's the Anhogan Hysteris, and nobody knows how it works, and so on. So therefore, the test we experience now is greater than the Akedas Yitzchak. But he says another thing, which is very interesting. What kind of a test is that? You remember the story of Eliyahu and Baal? Remember Har HaKarmel? Yeah, so Eliyahu says to the Jews, imagine what a scene it must have been. The whole Jewish nation is in front of Har HaKarmel, right? There's Eliyahu and Novi, right? On one side. And on the other side is all the, Ivdi Baal. All the guys from Baal, right? And it's a clear day, right? And we'll have korbanos, animals on top, right? And like Eliyahu says, the one of which lightning will come out of a clear sky, consume the altar, and so on. Hashem Elokim, that's the real God. And he says, if we prove we're, then follow me. If they prove theirs, fine. Fine. And what happens? We know the story. A lightning bolt came out of nowhere. I mean, there was no cloud, so you could say, well, it's Teva, right? A lightning bolt came out of a clear blue sky and devoured the Mizbech of Baal. Right? Just devoured it, and everybody said Hashem Elokim, right? So the Mishnah says that in the end of time, the lightning bolt will come and devour Baals. Why? That's irrational. In other words, what it means is that God is aiding and abetting Baal. But that's completely irrational. How can the Hashem, which is the, loves Klal Yisrael and says all the time, Avinu, he's our father and king. Excuse me, how can you actually lend credence to the Baal? It's unbelievable. It's like God has betrayed the Jewish people in the greatest possible manner. Not only has he not helped them, but he has actually signed on the dotted line of Baal.
How is that manifested?
Wait, so that's what the Mishnah says. That's complete irrationality, but much more. Not only it doesn't make sense, but he is actually supporting Avodah Zarah. Wow. That's the type of Nisoyim will be at the end. And that's because that's the whole concept. When they have first v'ois, all of this stuff's wrong. It's the barometer, it's the indicator, right? It has all the ideas. It doesn't allow us to become ruchni, but more than that, it actually aids and abets and supports Avodah Zarah. Will all the anti-Jewish succeed tremendously? That's what he said, and that's exactly what's happening. When you take a look around, who's got all the high positions? The positions of control, stature and all that. It's either Goyim, the Erev, the Erev Zero. These are guys in charge, So the question is, excuse me, what's happening? Why are these guys in charge and what's happening here, And this is the idea, that at the end of time it will appear as if God gives them all the hatzlacha, the know-how, the money, everything to destroy Yiddishkeit, or is certainly not to allow it to grow. And this is what the Mishnah says. And this is the concept of Tferes V'yois in the Goyim. Not only do they have the Tferes V'yois, but he aids and abets them as opposed to us. Pretty bad. It's grim. What can I tell you, But this is the end of time, this is the choshech that has to be faced in the end of time, and so on, Now, just to finish off, because it's getting late, you can ask, okay, how does God feel about this? How does he feel about this? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's his response to this? Is he getting joy out of this? Now you understand what the Gemara does. We read to you a short Gemara, Then you begin to understand what is going on in the mind of God in terms of how he feels about what he's doing. Remember what he's done. Not only do we not have Ruchni, right? Not only do they have all the gifts, right? But he actually is supporting them. Make sure that they're matzliach. And that's what it means. Anyway, Tanya, Omer Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi said, I was once walking on the derech, and I had a daven, so I walked into one of the churban of Yerushalayim. Looks like it was the Makom Mikdash, whatever. You walk into a churva to be able to daven, and so on. Anyway, so he met Eliyahu. Obviously, these people, they were able to do that, and he met me at the door. Yeah, so I finished the tefillah and I was about to walk out, and there's Eliyahu standing there. So then he said to me, yes, I said, Shalom Alecha Rebbe, and he said, Shalom Alecha, and so on, So then he asked me why I went to the churban. Whatever the halachic consequences are, shouldn't have gone there because it's dangerous, you should have did tefillah k'sara, whatever. Anyway, so then after that halachic discussion, V'omar li, He says to me, B'ni, my son, he's talking to Rabbi Yossi, Ma kol shemata b'churva zu. Did you hear a voice in this churva? You hear a voice? Did you hear anything? So, V'mati loy, yeah. I said to him, Shumati baskol. I heard a divine voice. A baskol is a divine voice, which you have to be a tremendous tzaddik to hear. It's a proclamation that has to be given out, and some people can hear it. Obviously, you have to be in a certain madrega. So obviously, Rabbi Yossi was, because he talked to Eliyahu Novi. So clearly, he was on the madrega. They're a baskol. I mean, just to talk to Eliyahu Novi is beyond belief, right? So he says, yeah, Shemenahemes kiyoino. It was cooing like a dove, v'omeres, and it was saying. And here's the incredible thing: Oy lebonim, woe is to the children. Shebe'avonosem, because of their sins, hechrafti es beisi, I destroyed my house. What is that? Yerushalayim. V'sorafti es hecholi, and I destroyed my palace, Beis Hamikdash. V'heglisim l'beino umas, and I exiled them among the umas. What does that sound like? It's method B. It's what it is. In other words, I destroyed my Beis Hamikdash. That's an unbelievable tiferes, and I put him in Golos. That's the ois, right? It's mamash what he's saying. And Moshe is saying, "Oily, woe is me." I mean, you're talking about an unbelievable tsar. So, V'yom Ali. So that's what I told. That's what Rabbi Yossi said. That's what I heard the bas call. V'yom Ali, and Eliyahu said to me, "Chayecho, b'chay roishcho, upon your life." It's not now that you heard it. You just have to chaparayim and you heard this, right? Every day, sholosh pomim, 3 times a day, omeres kach. The Rebbe says this. Did you believe this? Then he says something else, that when they come in and say Amen Yesh Marabo, the Rebbe shakes his head and he says. Again, oily that I exiled them from the Shulchan of the Father. What do you see from here? You see that what the Bershom did. I destroyed my house and I destroyed my city and all that. What are you talking about? What does it mean? What it means is that I went from method A to method B. That's what it means. It still has to be a tikkun. Bershom didn't throw everybody out and said, "I'll see you guys around." It's absurd. What he's really saying is that I had to go from one method of tikkun, which is the recommended way, as they say, and I had to go into method B, which is terrible. It'll do the tikkun, but it's terrible. But what? First v'oyis. He says that I destroyed my city, which is Yerushalayim. I burnt my heichal, which is the Beis Hamikdash, and I exiled them among the umas. That's the first v'oyis. You see, that's Mamish referring to the different methods of tikkun. But what's the feeling of the Rosh Hashanah? Oily, woe is me. You see, and he says that 3 times a day. So what do we see? That the Shechina, the Tsar of the Shechina, is beyond comprehension. It's not that Rosh Hashanah says, "Well, what's the difference? They'll do Tikkun A, they'll do Tikkun B." No, but the fact that Klal Yisrael has been shifted into Tikkun B is unbelievable Tsar to the Shechina. That we do not have the Tiferes V'Oyis. They have the Tiferes V'Oyis. And not only do they have the Tiferes V'Oyis, but they continue to be Matzliach, as if God aids and abets them. It's like the lightning strike comes on Baal, which means that the Bereshit wants Baal to be Matzliach, and he just abandons Klal Yisrael. But the effect of the Shekhinah is beyond belief. The Tzar, that we cannot have any asaga. In fact, if you ever felt, which is interesting, if you ever felt that Tsar of the Shekhinah for 1 nanosecond, you would die. It's interesting. You could not sovel the Tsar of the Shekhinah of that concept of what he said. What?
Where do we see that?
We don't. I mean, maybe somebody says it, but to experience the full Tsar is beyond human comprehension. Yeah, we do Tikkun Chatzos, right? What do you do with Tikkun Chatzos? What do you do with Tikkun Chatzos? Is it merely a matter of saying Kapitlach? No. It's to try to connect with the Tsar of the Shekhinah. What Tsar? the tsar that the Moshe has for going from A to B. With the Yidden, now we understand, it's not just that first noise they have. We're in Golas, which means we cannot become what we could have become. You know, could you imagine? Imagine, you know, you basically everybody is a father. Imagine he's in the role in the yeshiva, right? And you realize he's not going to make it in this yeshiva. You would have unbelievable tsar. And not just because you're paying a hefty tuition. That's not the only reason why, you know, because this kid will never make it. Whatever reason, the educational system is no good, and so on. You would have unbelievable tsar, right? As a human. Allah has kama v'kama that the Bosham has this tsar that it's not just we'll never make it. It's incredible what's going on. You know, we cannot be the ruchni we could be. We can't grow the way we could grow. So we see, therefore, that the tsar, the Shekhinah, is infinite. It's not stam. You probably can't even be measured. So that's what I'm saying. If you ever felt the total tsar, the Shekhinah, you couldn't live. It's beyond comprehension. So we try to, of course, do that, replicate that at a lower level by saying Tikkun Hatzos. So when you're taking Hatzos, what are you doing? What you are doing is trying to emotionally empathize, not sympathize. Empathize with God, how He feels, not how we feel. We're not talking about, well, I feel terrible that, I don't have the base, I made this. Excuse me, it's not about us in that sense. It's what does God feel that He cannot do the justice to His children, that they cannot be gedolim, that none of us, in a certain sense, really can aspire to be even gedolim of today. I mean, who can be a Chavetz Chaim? Or a Vali Yosef, or a Vali Yashiv? I mean, how many people can do that? So what we're trying to connect on Tikkun Chatzos is God's tsar, not ours. And we do in a certain measure, and so on, and that's what Tikkun Chatzos. So therefore we see, that the ultimate conclusion of all this is that the tsar, the Shekhinah, that he had to move from first v'ois from us to first v'ois of the Satan, and then all the stuff that comes as a result of that is tsar, which is beyond comprehension. That's something to remember, But in any case, we now have a handle on what first v'ois is. It's far more than just what it is. It's a whole barometer of who's got the most source and so on and so forth. Who's got the real goods, as they say, And also what it means that because we don't have Tferes V'ois, which is the gifts of the Shekhinah, we can't do it. We don't have the Tferes. We don't have the knowledge. We don't have the ability. This is the problem. Because of all the ma'akfim, all the guys who inhibit our growth. In any case, so this is the problem. And then I want to go next week into an interesting area, Shechem, Yosef and Shechem. Why is Yosef buried there? What does this have to do with Feres V'ois? And that's really the beginning of the history of the interplay between Feres V'ois, as we will see. It's very fascinating. You understand why Shechem is what it is, why Yosef is buried there. Why is that always the first place that the Arabs take over? I don't know if you realize that. In the Intifada, the first thing that went down was Shechem, was Kever Yosef and so on. And that's really, in many ways, the whole essence of Feres V'ois, which I want to do next week. So, next week is what, 9:30? 9:30? Well, I don't know if we're 9, because, what? Shabbos was over 7:12.
Hi everyone, my name is Chana Silver and I live here in Yerushalayim, and we're going to be talking today about Hanukkah. And we've entitled the class, like there's a war going on, which side are you on? And so I have many things to say. The truth is there's so much Torah on Hanukkah. It's very exciting. It's so exciting that Hanukkah is actually coming, and as we're going to see, it's really a chance for us to jumpstart so many different things that we're involved with, and we can make it actually on a much higher level. Okay, I want to start with a very famous piece written by Mark Twain, and I am going to read the whole paragraph because it totally applies to everything I'm getting ready to say. And but it is very famous, and so Mark Twain wrote in 1899, and he says as follows: "If the statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 1% of the human race. It suggests a nebulous, dim puff of stardust lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of, but he is heard of, has always been heard of. He is as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his commercial importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. His contributions to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, abstruse learning are also way out of proportion to the smallness of his numbers. He has made a marvelous fight in this world in all the ages, and has done it with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, and the Persian rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greek and the Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they are gone. Other peoples have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in twilight now, or they have vanished. The Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jew. All forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality?" Right, so Mark Twain wrote this a little over 100 years ago. Altogether interesting because Mark Twain was an agnostic. In other words, he wasn't really sure if there was a God or not. And he sees that the Jews, Klal Yisrael, has existed throughout all the ages. All these amazing empires rose, had very high times, and then fell, don't really exist anymore. And yet we are here. We are here. And the truth is that's exactly what Al-Hanisim, I'm sorry, not Al-Hanisim, but Ma'oz Tzur, right, what we sing after we light the Hanukkah candles. That's exactly what Ma'oz Tzur says several times over. Right, there's a bunch of different phrases. Chel paro v'chol zaro yordu ke'even bimtzula. Right, the whole host, the whole army of Paro during the Egypt time, and all of his strength, everything fell like a deep stone into the Yam Suf, into the Red Sea. And then another phrase talking about Bavel, Babylonia. Kates, Bavel, Zerubbabel, the Kates Shivim Noshati. Again, Bavel was the first, they destroyed, of course, the first temple, and they certainly rose. They had tremendous world power and things that were all going on, and they destroyed the temple, stood for 410 years, and yet where are they now? In other words, after 70 short years of exile, so then we came back for the second temple. And then Haman, during the time of Purim, Agagi ben Hamdasa, Rov Banav, Bekinyanov, all his sons and everything, Al Ha'etz Talisa, his end and all of their end, all hung. And then, of course, where we are right now in our time coming up is Yevanim Nikbetzu Alai, that the Greeks came upon us. And again, where are they, right? They're gone, right? And so it's true, exactly what he said. This Jew saw them all, beat them all, and we're still here, and we're still rolling. Okay, so that's amazing. We're actually going to come back to this piece at the very end of the class. We're going to talk about it a little bit. But let's put all this on pause. Let me just root you. I know all the times when I was going through school, I very much enjoyed what I was learning, whatever it was, but didn't always exactly understand exactly the whole time period of when things were going on. And so we're talking about a story that happened 2,200 years ago. It's smack in the middle of the Second Temple, the Bayis Sheni, and it's really quite ancient. And it's a very strange time. Rav Dessler talks about the idea that we were actually in a geula. We were in a redemption time period, and yet we actually experienced a gullus, an exile, in the middle of that. In other words, usually we have geula or gullus. In other words, it's one of the two. But this was actually very strange because in the middle of this whole thing, we experienced like this traumatic, serious time. And so it took place, the people that were definitely running a lot of the show in the world were the Greeks, and Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth. So he really tried, as we know, it's an old story, but it's important to go over just for a few moments. He really tried to Hellenize the Jews, right? That's this term that formed in the times of the Greeks, really, to Hellenize the Jews, to try to assimilate the Jews, and actually really try to get them away from the concept of one God. So I know a lot of this probably is familiar to you, but again, it's just kedai. It's in order to talk a little bit about the history. Now, it's very interesting in Shir HaShirim, in Perek Hey, Pasuk Zion. So there's a beautiful Shir HaShirim, which is Song of Songs. There's a very interesting and poignant depiction different things that are going on in the history of Klal Yisrael. And so what Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, tells us is, it's a very interesting pasuk. It says, Mitzauni Hashomrim. There's a whole depiction of this maiden, and she can't find her beloved. They made up to meet, and she doesn't meet him, and then she goes home, and it's very amazing psukim over there. And she goes back, and she can't sleep, and she's back and forth on her bed, and she's like, it's a fitful sleep. And then finally he's at the door, and she hears him, and yet she still doesn't get up. She's not able to get out of bed. She says, "Go away, you stood me up." And he says, "Come, please open the door. I'm on the other side of the door." And finally, eventually she gets up, and she goes and she opens the door, and he's not there. And he's like, she looks to the left, she looks to the right. There's absolutely nobody there. He's gone. He left. She missed her chance. And so she's out, and she's in her bedclothes. And she starts running out in the street, asking, has anybody seen my beloved? He's got these red ruby lips and hair black like a raven. It's a whole graphic description. And she's running around. And what one of the last verses, one of the last psukim in this scenario says, Mitzauni Hashomrim Hasovavim Ba'ir, that the guards who were circling the city, right? She's running around with this wild woman. That's the mashal, the parable in the city. And so the guards who circle the city, they find her. Hikuni Pitzauni. They hit me and they blunge in me. Nasu esredidi me alai. They take my jewelry from me. Shomrei hachomos, those guards of the walls. And so according to Evan Ezra actually tells us that it's talking exactly about this time period, that the nimshal, that the whole concept of what it is that it's dealing with this time where we really had the Beis HaMikdash and we had the temple, but yet in the middle of this whole thing, we ended up losing an essence of what our connection was with God, which is again entirely strange, right? There were different miracles, open miracles going on in the time period, and yet the Jews, it wasn't so good for them. They decided that they really were looking elsewhere. They wanted to assimilate. They wanted to Hellenize. They wanted to see what was going on with the Western culture of the time, and so then we have this whole thing where the Greeks really get very much in charge of all kinds of things, and so they really destroy our temple. But even before the destruction of the temple, which comes 200 years later, many of the things fell to the wayside. In other words, the Jews really weren't keeping the mitzvos as they should, and a lot of the elements, as we know, with the temple itself, actually weren't being kept. All the different service that they were supposed to be keeping in that. And so Evan Ezra sees in this time period that, speaking specifically about Hanukkah, it's an interesting reference to Hanukkah that most people don't necessarily quote. And of course, what everyone really agrees on is that Hanukkah was really a spiritual war. In other words, they were trying very, very hard. As we know, there's some famous information. They were trying to stop the keeping of mitzvos, and so they forbid. The Greeks forbid the keeping of Shabbos. They forbid if you kept it, out in the open. They forbid Torah learning. They forbid the concept of bris milah, circumcision. They forbid the idea of Rosh Chodesh, right? The concept of the new moon. All of these are deep. If we were going to go, there's many points to go into. I'm not going to focus on those ideas, but these are deep elements. In other words, the commonality between all of this is these are super deep elements to the keeping of the mitzvos, the connection to God. And as we know, they were really trying to eradicate the concept of godliness in the world. And there were so many people who were coming onto that ship. It's actually really very similar to the time period that we're living in. It's an unbelievable, we're living a microcosm of what that time period was. And again, we look at them and we're like, how could it be? You had the Beis HaMikdash, you had open miracles, things were going on, you were in a geula, redemption time period. How does that work? We certainly can't judge them. There's no way that we can judge them. We certainly didn't live during that time. We don't know, but we can deal very much. Everything I'm really saying and getting ready to say, we can entirely relate to the time period that we're going into, that we live in, rather. And the concept of Hanukkah, as we'll see, as I said, is this amazing jump start to get to a higher place. It's really, it's an unbelievable thing, and that's what we're going to talk about. But I want to just delve for a few more moments into the spiritual war. Again, they were happy to keep the fact that Jews were around, but they wanted to loosen the fetters of connection, so to speak, with our relationship with God. And of course, the way to do that is to really hit at the soul element, which is all the mitzvahs and all the different commandments that we're keeping. So these all main commandments, these were like super deep connections, so therefore they forbid it. If you were caught doing any one of these things, so then that's it, you were killed, right? It's a crazy situation, and most people don't actually realize historically that when we know the story is perhaps a little bit famous to us, but this whole thing with the forbidding of the keeping of these mitzvos and with the Greeks over them lasted for 52 years. It's a long time, right? People think like, okay, it was a year or so and it was difficult. 52 years, that's a very, very long time. People lived under this dread of having to do mitzvos secretly. It really was an exile in the middle of a shining time when the Beis HaMikdash really stood. And so really all the Meforshim, all the commentaries point to the idea that it really did occur because Klal Yisrael did not appreciate who they were. They did not appreciate the fact that they were in a redemption time period connected to God. They took it for granted. And again, they wanted to experience what was going on. What's the Western culture? Let's just figure it all out. And what the Greeks, of course, were going for and everything they stood for is the concept, as we said, to eradicate the concept of godliness in the world. The Greeks wanted to pull them down. You become just like us. You can stay Jews, it's fine, but just don't have that deep connection to God. And we want to eradicate the concept of godliness. And we don't want the concept of godliness to be in the world. And if we can do that, great. So they wouldn't mind letting us live. And as we know, the Greeks were very much the concept of physical for physical. They certainly were, they did excel very much in all the different elements of physicality, in terms of culture, in terms of architecture, in terms of art, in terms of the physical, physique, and muscular situations, and exercise, and all the gladiator things. In other words, all those things, they certainly did excel. And the idea is that physical for physical. I spoke last week, some of you were here, some of you were not. We were actually connecting, we were talking about the idea of ultimately the concept of lighting candles and women. But in general, we're saying that the deeper element of this world was created. I'm just going to repeat that idea because it fits in exactly. It's exactly really what we're trying to say. And so the whole concept is that this world was created. We as Jews know this world was created with the letter Hey. The letter Hey actually has two different letters in it. It has the letter Dalet and it has the letter Yud. And so the letter Dalet, says the Maharal, is the idea of spreading out in the physical world. The letter Dalet stands for things that are tangible, real, physical, material. Because if we had those two straight lines of what the Dalet is, so this line would continue vertically, infinitely, and this line could continue, that's horizontally. This line could continue vertically, and so things in the physical world take up space. The letter Dalet stands for tangible, real, physical, material things, and the letter Yud stands for the concept of the world of the spiritual. It's the smallest physical, tangible letter. And aside from in the letter Hey, it's always reaching at the top. We always write the letter Yud at the top, and it's always like reaching to the higher spheres. It stands for the world of the future, the world of creativity, the world that hasn't occurred yet, the world that doesn't exist yet. It's not tangible. It's there in potential, if you will, but it's not there actually in reality, which is the world of the spiritual, because the spiritual world is quite real. It's just not necessarily tangible. It's spiritual. That's exactly what it is. And so this world was formed with the letter Hey, and so that's exactly what we're doing. In other words, we as thinking Jews totally understand that every mitzvah that we do is everything that we try to accomplish in this world. We're working in the world of the physical, the world of the Dalet, and we're reaching for the spiritual. In other words, everything we do is a physical action that reaches for the spiritual, and we create something eternal. And so that's exactly what the Greeks, hashkafically, Jewish outlook-wise, did understand, and they were trying to eradicate it. They were trying to get rid of this whole concept of the fact of godliness. And they were glorifying the world of the physical. All the Greek gods, so to speak, of course, all physical, all the stories there in mythology and things like that. And it's interesting, there's a few pretty famous gematrias and things that I love to think about. Like the world of Torah is so deep. Like you learn something on a simple form, you learn a deeper form, and yet a deeper form, and different ways of slicing words and things. There's just so much to learn. And so a famous one is the idea of Yavan, which is the word for Greek, Yud Vav Nun Sofis. The gematria, it adds up to 66. And as we know, Haya Hova V'Yihiyah, the fact that we're constantly talking about the idea that God was, He is, and He always will be, that is also 66. So in other words, that's exactly the whole culture, the whole nation of what Yavan, the Greeks, stood for, was literally to eradicate this concept of godliness in the world. It's the exact same gematria. And then in Yeshaya, in Isaiah, in the 40th chapter, the beautiful pasuk, a beautiful verse, it says, Se'u marom einechem, lift your eyes on high, Ur'u mi bara ela, and see who created all of these. In other words, everything that's in the world, all the sun, the moon, the constellations, this entire gorgeous world, Isaiah is telling us to look and look up and just to see, to recognize that everything, literally everything in the world as we know, comes from God. It's only from God. We're all about seeing God, bring God out in the world. And so very, very interesting. If we had a chalkboard, which we certainly do not. So, Su'u marom einecha. If you take the first letters of those first three words that Isaiah is telling us, so it spells the word Su'u marom einechem. What? Shema. It says the word Shema, which is Kabbalah's Ol Malchus Shemayim. It's the whole idea of accepting God's presence and His oneness in the world and His kingship in the world. So it's literally what the words are saying, but then it's like a code, right? Su'u marom einechem. Shema stands for the Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, right? There's one God in the world, and we proclaim that with everything that we're all about. And then on the words mi bara ela, look and see, lift your eyes on high, look and see who created all of these. Of course, it's God. And so, mi ela, the words mi ela, they add up in Gematria to 86, right? In other words, Hashem is the one that did all this. And Elokim, right? I'm not saying his real name, but one of God's names, but really you add in the hey, not a kuf. Elokim, with the hey, is also 86. Mi ela, in other words, who created all of this? Elokim, it's a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And there's one more Gematria I have to throw in. I personally am very much into what we call Niflos Habore, right? The wonders of the Creator, the wonders of the creation. And just looking outside, because everything is godly, there's something to learn from everything. It's just amazing. And so Ha-Teva, the nature, like everything natural, like the physical world, like the trees and plants, agriculture, animals, everything physically. So Ha-Teva, that's also the Gematria of 86, as is Mi-Ela, Hashem is the one that did all this, as is Elokim. It's just amazing how it all fits in. Everything points to the fact of God and godliness in this world. And that's what the Greeks were trying to do to try to eradicate this whole concept. And so again, we as Jews, we take the physical, we use it to access the spiritual, and that's really what we're all about. And so the truth is, we look back at that time period and isn't that what they were trying to do? But yes and no. In other words, you had certain Jews that really came through, as we'll see, and really did try to live this and bring this out. And you had many masses of people who just were assimilating. So again, very much we can relate to the time period 2,200 years ago, and yet it's really very similar to what's going on with us right now. And so the fact that we have 8 days of Hanukkah that we can jumpstart ourselves to tap into many deep messages about really bringing out the godliness into the world. That's what we're really talking about. So yeah, it happens to be it's an unbelievable thing, very fascinating. Everything that surrounds Hanukkah is always going to be connected to this theme, and the Haftarah that we read, right, the part from the prophets that we read during Shabbos Hanukkah, right? There's always going to be a Shabbos Hanukkah. It's in Zechariah, and it's in Perek Dalet Pasuk Vav. And ultimately, I think it became a song, but it's a pasuk over here in Zechariah, and it says, Lo b'chayil, not with strength, lo b'koach, not with other kinds of strength, ki im beruchi, amar Hashem. But everything really that goes on in this world, it's with Hashem's spirit. Hashem says, it's with my spirit, amar Hashem, God tells us. So in other words, it's not our power, it's not the strength, not kochi ve'otzim yadi, it's not the power, our power, the strength of our hands, it's really all HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, I really have to share with you something that really just happened yesterday. When I was part of a Shabbaton that my husband is a Rebbe in Centers, and so we had a Shabbaton in Tzfas, and it was really unbelievable. Rav Gavriel Sassoon was there, and he came to be with us the whole Shabbos, and he spoke at Shalosh Shudas, and it was very unbelievable. It was very powerful. How a person like this could get up and stand up and speak in front of people and smile, and the whole Shabbos he was smiling like it doesn't make sense. Right? A person who lost so many children, I believe today actually was supposed to be the bar mitzvah of one of the children, and he's making a siyum. He's making a siyum for his son that couldn't. And it was so poignant. And so he was actually tying in some ideas about Hanukkah, and really, honestly, he was sharing with us one of the secrets of what he lives and how he can hold his head up and how he can function. And it ties in exactly to everything that we're saying now in this whole Tekufa, this whole time period of what we're getting involved in now with Hanukkah coming up very soon. And so he was talking there about the idea. So we're talking about living a life. I'm going to intersperse his words and part of what I'm trying to say, because it's really all exactly the same thing. It was just unbelievable. But like seeing him there, speaking these words and smiling, it was just off the charts. Honestly, it was off the charts. And because he lives it. It's a secret. It's his secret of how he does it, and I think we can tap into it as well. And again, that's what I'm getting ready to talk about is the koach of Hanukkah. We have 8 days to be able to tap into this. And he was talking about the idea of Mesiras Nefesh, right? To be Moser Nefesh for God. Okay, so Mesiras Nefesh we translate many times as self-sacrifice, to say sacrifice ourselves, which that is what it is. Moser is the word to transfer, right? To be Moser something is to transfer Nefesh, right? The soul. Transfer literally our soul, not from our needs, our desires, and our wants, but what does God want? Mesiras Nefesh is to live on that higher realm, to constantly ask myself, what does God want from me? In other words, what is my life supposed to be all about? And again, of course, it's to connect to God pretty much every moment that we can. And so he was speaking about the idea that when people are Mesiras Nefesh, they transfer their own soul, their own desires for God, and they live life on that higher realm within the physical world. In other words, we're supposed to use the physical. That's this world. We're physical, we're utilizing the physical, and we're using it to access the spiritual to create eternal things moment by moment as we go through our lives. So when a person is Mesiras Nefesh for Hashem, so what happens is incredible siyata d'shmaya. We get unbelievable help from heaven that is raining down literally on us spiritually. And we're actually zoche to see elements of the Shekhinah, elements of the divine presence more in our lives. Okay, so these ideas are actually one and the same. I want to bring a proof of that, a source for what I just said. And one of the sources, we talk about the idea of the power of a mitzvah. The power of a mitzvah. We don't appreciate what a mitzvah does. And again, we want to try. We don't just have any Jewish holiday. We don't just have the holiday because we're commemorating what happened way back when, right? We are commemorating what happened way back when. That's true. But again, the kochos, the powers, the spiritual elements that existed in the world at that time, and what we're overcome, what we're done, whatever it was that occurred, whatever we're celebrating, those elements exist today. Like as we know with Passover, it's not just commemorating the exodus of Egypt, but literally the elements of redemption exist very prevalently at that time. Redemption, we certainly would hope on a national scale to be able to go into a future redemption time, but also redemption from our own lives. In other words, like to redeem ourselves from the things that shackle us. In other words, we could go through every single element of the Jewish year, so to speak, and we can tap into it. So it's not just commemorating, but it's the fact that these sparks were passed down to us spiritually, and we can grab at them easier than we can grab at them the other points of the year. We can grab at them the whole time because obviously we have to be able always to reach for higher levels. But during these 8 days of Hanukkah, this is actually one of the main ideas that we can actually very much tap into and build ourselves on a higher level. And it's an amazing thing. So one of the sources, the power of a mitzvah, so Ramban, Nachmanides, he tells us in Parashas Vayera, in Sefer Bereshis, in Perek Yud Ches Pasuk Aleph, he's talking there, it's talking about the bris, the circumcision that Avraham Avinu gave to himself, basically, at the beginning. And so then it says that Avraham was able to actually perceive deeper elements of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence. And so, in other words, when we do a mitzvah correctly and fully and wholesomely, and we tap into it, and we understand what we're doing, so we're zocha, we merit all these extra things. In other words, it's not just, okay, score, and I'm creating something for my eternal world upstairs, which we are, right? But in other words, the here and the now, right here in my physical life, as I'm going through the moments of my life, there are things that are going to open up to me that come down in a spiritual form, but it's going to help my life. In other words, we're going to see elements of the divine presence, if you will. We're going to feel the elements of hashgacha pratis. In other words, siyata d'shmaya. We're going to see all these things that are going to definitely open up for us in our lives. And if we only appreciated the value of what a real mitzvah does, so then we really would live life on a higher level. In other words, many times we're just conditioned, and this is what we do, and we don't think about it. But to understand, to do the mitzvah properly and then fully, which I'm going to talk about, and to understand that it's really creating not only something eternal, but it's affecting us right now, this very moment. Even though I can't feel it, I can't sense it. As we know, there's many things in Judaism that do not meet the eye. There's many spiritual levels of things that are happening that if we could peel away and we could see, so then we'd understand it, but we can't. We can sense it sometimes, but to understand at least that these things are actually really happening. And so that's one example that the Ramban brings there. And also another example is he talks there about how when Klal Yisrael fully, completely, wholesomely constructed the Mishkan, the tabernacle, down to the last small detail that God was commanding them on every single level, so then the whole nation was able to catch a deeper glimpse of God, like by prophecy or whatever that was. In other words, it was like a reward for the fact that they did this entire mitzvah of creating the tabernacle the way they were supposed to, wholesomely. And so these are the two examples that he brings. And so this idea of being Moser Nefesh is really the keeping of mitzvos on a higher level. And it's interesting because we think like, you know, we all have daily struggles, we all have different things, and we want to try to just do the best we can, we want to try to overcome it. But these struggles were given to us directly by Hashem, right? Rav Sassoon was talking about the idea that obviously everything happens for a reason. We don't always know those reasons, but there is no coincidence, there's no happenstance whatsoever, not in any minor detail at all, ever in the world. And so Hashem creates for us a nisayon every moment, like of our lives, right? A test that we struggle and we have to strive, and he's creating things that are literally, he was describing it, the definition of a nisayon, a test, that in other words, we have the circle of our lives, and everything that's really in the circle, that's not necessarily a test. So it's things we're keeping, things we're doing, things we are, right? And then we have things that perhaps would be outside the circle of our lives. And so God really can't test us with those things because perhaps we really couldn't come through with that. In other words, it's literally outside the realm of what we could accomplish. So every time a nisayon occurs in our life, a test, which occurs many times a day, all the time, right? It's literally at the rim of the circle. In other words, if we actually can come through and strive to a higher level because of the things that are happening in our lives, so then we enhance our circle. That's literally at the rim. And so the circle actually gets bigger. The circle gets bigger, and we enhance ourselves, our lives, our future, our eternality, everything. And so again, this is really part of the secret of what he's living. In other words, he obviously understands, and that's when Hashem, so to speak, one piece, is that's what Hashem, we have the nisayon, and nisayon comes from the word nes. In other words, that's when a miracle could occur. In other words, we see the extra divine supervision, we feel this help from heaven, we feel this element of the divine presence. In other words, whatever it is, we can rise spiritually, literally, we can enhance ourselves, our lives, our spirituality, that yud within us, that soul within us, by actually striving and struggling and having a breakthrough, so to speak, within the elements of our lives. And the bottom line is we sell ourselves short. We don't feel that we can do it because we don't have enough belief in ourselves. But the bottom line is, as we know, the famous concept is that any nisayon that we're given, any test that we're given in life, we can pass. We don't feel we can pass many times. That's the issue, but we certainly can pass. And so that's what he was talking about, is that going back to tying it into Hanukkah, so that's definitely how he lives his life. In other words, he views it as this nisayon directly from Hashem, obviously, and so it was at the rim of his circle, and he's obligated. He's obligated to strive and struggle and to pass his test. And like surely he would have other things. He was talking about how, you know, all he did was like live for his family and for his children, and you know, Hashem has other divine plans. There's things that preceded us. Before we came into this world, there's things that are going to come after us. We're just this little myopic situation right now in the course of our lives. And that's how we have to try to literally take moment to moment as we go through, try to figure out what in fact does God want from me. That's the concept of Mesiras Nefesh. What does God want from me? So let's go a little bit back now into the Hanukkah story. So we had this whole serious, crazy time where people were assimilating, and we had the temple, but it had fallen into disuse, crazy stuff going on, and you had this little group of the Chashmonaim, right? These people all from Matisyahu and his family, and again, these were, you know, picture like some really serious Orthodox neighborhood here where people are, you know, learning Torah, they're in yeshiva. These were not, you know, the powerful Greek people who were working out all day. And so these people literally were Mesiras Nefesh for God. That's the whole point. In other words, we could have said, you know, let's go ahead. They could have said, you know, let's go ahead. We're just going to stay in our little lives right here in our religious section, and we're going to learn the Torah, and we're just going to do what we can in our lives. And they could have, of course, like that certainly would have been not a bad thing, right? But these people saw that the elements of what Hashem was bringing in this world, the craziness during such a time that could have been an incredibly powerful, amazing time, was bringing all this evil into the world. Obviously, it had to be a message to us. And so they said, you know, Hashem wants us to be Mesiras Nefesh. Hashem wants us to overcome and strive and struggle on a higher level. So all these people who were certainly not warriors go to bat against the Greek army. Again, it's a famous story, but it's wild. When you really think about it, it's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. But that was their Mesiras Nefesh. And what happened? Everything we just said. They were zocha to open miracles, absolutely open miracles. They saw the divine presence. They saw help from heaven because they overcame the Greeks and they were able to get back into the temple. And then further on, so that's one element, the whole war, right? And they totally overcame themselves and won, right? That's all the shefa, all the amazing influence coming down spiritually. And so then they finally get to the temple. They want to start the whole thing. But you see, these were what we call lechatchila Jews. Matisyahu, all these chashmanayim, they were lechatchila Jews. They wanted to keep things on the highest of levels. They didn't want to settle. They wanted to do things wholesomely and fully. Such a deep message to us. So then they finally get in there. And there is... so everything was in disarray. The Greeks had just smashed everything. And as we know, famous story, so they're looking and looking until they find one vial of oil to light the menorah that is sealed, still from the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. And the bottom line is, all the Meforshim, all the commentaries tell us they didn't need to do that, not on any level. Because there's this halacha, it's called Tuma Hutra B'tzibor, that if you have a mitzvah that involves the whole congregation that needs to be kept and needs to be done, so you're allowed to cut corners. You're allowed, they could have just found some oil that was already open, the seal wasn't there. They could have used that to light the menorah. But they said, no, we are living a lechatchila life. We're living a life of Mesiras Nefesh. We just won this war, overcoming all odds, which doesn't make any sense at all. And so therefore, we want to now keep going. Like, we're on a high with this. We are living our lives Mesiras Nefesh. So they looked, and of course, Hashem creates not only the miracle that they found the oil, right? That's in and of itself, but they found one vial of oil that should have burned for 1 day, and of course, it burned for 8. So the whole thing, and so that's the burning for 8 days, like this one little vial that should not have burned, more than 24 hours or whatever it was, and so it burned for an additional 7 days. So that's the Shekhinah, that's the open divine presence that they see. That's like the revelation. In other words, like everything fits in beautifully and amazingly with really everything that we're talking about. They really strove higher and tried to live their life as we sing lechatchila, and to, like, on that highest of levels, to do things exactly as it needs to be. And so both times with the war, with the candles, so that with the flames, the oil, so then they saw everything that we're talking about over here. And the bottom line, it's the same for us. It really is the same for us. If we can actually get ourselves out of that reverie of just what we've been doing, because perhaps we're raised with it, or perhaps we came to it at other levels when we were a little bit older, whatever it is, but when we can actually just rise higher and think more about what we're doing, do things more fully, more wholesomely, so then we're able to actually see that in our lives. And again, it's a win-win situation, because it's helping us spiritually within our own lives, as I said, and it's helping the whole cosmos. It's helping the whole cosmos. And if we just understood how much was at stake with every single little act that we did right and fully and wholesomely, so then perhaps we would be able to tap into that a little bit more. And so Hashem gives us amazing times like Hanukkah to be able to try to see this. Now, it's a very interesting thing, because everything that I'm saying, this concept of Mesiras Nefesh, living on a higher level for God, it totally involves the concept of emunah. In other words, emunah, faithfulness in God, is really, honestly, everything. As we know, Habakkuk, in his amazing, just couple of prakim that he's found in Treyasar, Habakkuk was the son of the Isha Hashunamis, this woman from Shunem, which is near Haifa, and his story actually takes place during the time of the First Temple. And to make a very long story short, so he died as a child, and he was resurrected. He was brought back to life by the prophet Elisha. And all the Meforshim, all the commentaries there, talk about his righteous mother, who was known as the woman from Shunem. And they say that it was in the zechus, in the merit of her emunah, her faithfulness in Hashem, that Elisha was able to actually perform the Suchiyas HaMesim, this concept of resurrection of the dead. And her incredible emunah, and she's known as an Isha Gedola, right? The Meforshim talk a lot of reasons why she was such an amazing, huge woman. She was really super, very righteous on every level, and she had this high level of emunah, and this was the mother that raised Habakkuk. So when Habakkuk is resurrected, he grows up, and he becomes the prophet Habakkuk, and he brings to us something unbelievably amazing. He says in his prakim, just a few prakim, he says, a very famous idea, tzaddik be'emunaso yichya. And so this idea comes to us from Habakkuk, that if you want to learn how to be a righteous person, you want to really be connected to God, you have to live in your emunah. You have to see Hashem in front of you every moment of your life. And it's a perfect story. Again, a larger picture. Maybe sometime we can talk about it. When you delve into the story, it's an unbelievable thing. But of course, it's Habakkuk that proclaims this to the world. Of course, because he had a mother whose his very life was due to the fact that his mother believed that ultimately Elisha Hashem could do that, and so it was his mother's belief. And he was raised with this amazing woman. That was his mother, moment to moment, like the koach of what a woman could do, and being a mommy. Really an unbelievable thing. And so he brings to the world, if you want to be a righteous person, it's all about emunah. Now, on top of that, or rather connected to that, so there's a Gemara in Makos, which tells us that different people were saying that the whole world stands on, the whole concept of Judaism stands on like 10, 11 things, 10 things, 7 things, 5 things, 3 things, all different elements of mitzvos, right? So the end of the Gemara says, Ba Chavakuk, Chavakuk comes, Ve'emidan al achas, and he stands them up on one concept, Tzaddik be'emunaso yichya. If you want to be a righteous person, you have to live in your emunah. You have to see Hashem minute to minute. And so we're talking about Mesiras Nefesh. How can I have self-sacrifice or transfer my very soul back to God, it's really a piece of Him, my soul, right? How can I do that? Of course, without believing in Him, without seeing Him minute to minute. Emunah is not this, again, vast topic, but emunah is not this whole idea of just, understanding that God's up there somewhere, but the whole concept of living with Him minute to minute. Many ways to work on emunah. One incredible concept is just to ask myself bunches of times a day, what does God want from me now? What does He want from me now? In other words, every decision that we make, bring God into the picture. It's going to help enhance your emunah because you're really trying to figure out, what does He want now? If you don't know what He wants, so then you got to seek advice. You got to find out, like exactly what am I supposed to be doing in this situation or whatever it is. But many of us do, as we come through our lives, we do have knowledge. In fact, what God wants, we don't always make decisions according to that. It's kind of interesting, right? Again, our own ego, so to speak, gets in the way. And so Mesiras Nefesh is removal of that ego. That's really what it is. In other words, it's that transference of, let me give my soul to God. My soul's a piece of God. He put me in a physical body, but let me overcome myself to do God's will, right? To make His will my will. And so again, Hanukkah is the time, in particular, that we can actually work on these kochos, on these powers. Because again, Mesiras Nefesh and is connected very much, as we see, and as we're talking about, to emunah. It's the idea of living life on that higher level and being that living, breathing sanctification of God's name every minute, right? A person really can do this. In the physical world, as we go through our physical activities, certainly we're doing mitzvos, that's true, but just regular things, if we can become that living, breathing element of really who we are, we have to come into ourselves. We already have it. It's a matter of tapping it out. Much of what we have is lying there in potential. That's really what it is. I want to tell you guys a story that happens. So I run trips to Poland.